thing. But if I'm like talking to an author, I won't just read his latest book. I'll read all his books, period. Just all his books. I mean, unless it is someone like Gandhi and Ambedkar, who was so prolific, who wrote hundreds of, Gandhi's collected volumes are 100 volumes, and they're all available online. But it's just, you can't go through all of that. But otherwise, I'll try to read all of the guest books. I'll try to see all their interviews on YouTube, all their podcast interviews, and read around the subject also.
लाइट्स कैमरा आज़ादी एक ऐसा शो है जो हस्तियों को ढूंढ रहा है। ये वो हस्तियां हैं जिनने हमेशा समाज को चुनौती दी है। ये वो लोग हैं जो हमेशा निडर, आत्मविश्वासी और अग्रिम रहे हैं। भले ही जनता ने कभी इन्हें सराहा ना हो, मगर इन्होंने हमेशा देश के लिए काम किया है। हम इनसे बात करके इनका नज़रिया समझना चाहते हैं, जानना चाहते हैं कि ये लोग समाज को कैसे देखते हैं, और ये सीखना चाहते हैं कि ज़िंदगी को बिना डरे कैसे जिया जाए। मेरा नाम है वंदित जैन और मैं इन कहानियों को आप तक लाने का बस एक माध्यम हूँ।
Hi everyone. This journey of bringing voices who challenge the status quo has been going on since Feb 20. While I've enjoyed every bit of it, the truth is I haven't made much money out of this effort. Here is what I propose. For an episode that you like, that touches your heart in some manner, you make the single minimum contribution that you can to the show. If you like my proposition, please head on to lightscameraazadi.in/support-LCA and make a donation that is convenient to you. Thank you. For quite some time, I have been thinking of putting my thoughts on paper and share them with you regularly. So I'm thrilled to announce my bi-monthly newsletter, Hypothesis. Hypothesis is a newsletter that is the show's extension, a commentary on society and culture as I see it. Here I want to talk about my observation of the world around me, how I see people-to-people interaction, families, social structure, a bit of politics, and essentially my hypothesis of why things are. If you would like to subscribe, go to lightscameraazadi.in/newsletter. You will find the link in the show description. I repeat, lightscameraazadi.in/newsletter. Thank you.
वेलकम टू अनदर फैंटास्टिक एपिसोड ऑफ लाइट्स कैमरा आज़ादी। आई नो 2 महीने बाद मुलाकात हो रही है यार, नो एक्सक्यूजेस, जस्ट डिलेज फ्रॉम माई एंड, नई जॉब और बस बहुत काम। आई विल बी मोर कंसिस्टेंट फ्रॉम जनवरी एंड इन 2022 आई प्रॉमिस अ मिनिमम ऑफ 2 एपिसोड्स एंड 2 न्यूज़लेटर्स एवरी मंथ। ये एपिसोड बहुत खास है। एक तो लास्ट एपिसोड है साल का, तो पहले तो धन्यवाद फॉर सच एन अमेजिंग ईयर। दिस कुडंट हैव बीन बेटर विदाउट योर सपोर्ट। दूसरा ये कि ये एक ऐसे गेस्ट के साथ है जिनको मैं जनरली बहुत एडमायर करता हूँ, एंड इनके पॉडकास्टिंग मेथड्स एंड मैकेनिज्म का मेरे पे और मेरे बिहेवियर एज अ होस्ट पे बहुत डीप इम्पैक्ट रहा है। जब मैंने LCA शुरू करा था तो आई ऑफन वंडर्ड व्हाट आर सम अमेजिंग पॉडकास्ट इन इंडिया, स्पेशली इन दिस जॉनर, एंड सीन एंड द अनसीन वाज अनडाउटेडली नंबर 1 व्हेन इट कम्स टू पॉलिटिकल साइंस एंड पब्लिक पॉलिसी, एंड इट स्टिल इज. It was hosted by someone who would read all the books by the guest before the interview, who would spend hours of research before the episode, and who would allow the guest to speak for minutes and minutes, if not hours, without interruption. This was none other than Amit Varma, the OG long-form podcaster of India, a show and a guy who gave direction to Indian podcast and showed many of us the scope of possibilities that Indian podcast had. He is well-read, knowledgeable, politically sound and humble. This is an episode where we go and understand his journey, his understanding of Indian politics, and the philosophy of his show, and just general chit-chat about India and podcasting. If you haven't heard about him by any chance, just go and check Seen in the Unseen, the most intellectual podcast of India. And Amit also runs an amazing writing course called The Art of Clear Writing. Do check it out. All of these things you will find in the show notes, which also brings me to another point, the new format of the show notes now. I hope you'll like it. It is now more nuanced and more detailed. Before we head on to the episode, please subscribe us on YouTube, follow on Spotify, and please rate us on Spotify. That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. And now, without wasting much time, let us go and meet OG podcaster Amit Varma. So 3, 2, 1, OG podcaster Amit Varma, Lights Camera Azadi में बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
थैंक यू मुझे बुलाने के लिए, थैंक यू, आई एम वेरी ग्लैड टू बी हियर। आप ओजी पॉडकास्टर बोल के एम्बैरस कर रहे हो। मैंने तो 2017 जनवरी में शुरू की थी और पॉडकास्टिंग तो कुछ उससे पहले 12, 13, 14 साल से चल रही है। बट थैंक यू फॉर इनवाइटिंग मी।
यस, बट यू गेट द इमोशन। अमित, हाउ डिड यू एंडेड अप बीइंग अ पॉडकास्टर? ये बहुत बड़ा सवाल है और सबको भी, बहुत लोगों को ये सवाल आता है कि blogging, then you were sort of in little bit in covering cricket, then you ended up being a podcaster. तो मुझे essentially the question ये है अमित, आप आपके podcast में सबसे पहले पूछते हो कि भाई आप यहाँ तक कैसे पहुंचे. तो what is Amit Varma's journey like, and I want you to like tell me like in detail as much as you can from the time you know from like जैसे in your episodes guest tell then कि मैं यहाँ से schooling करी थी, वहां से लेके अभी तक, if you can just tell us that will be great.
ठीक है, मेरी दवाई अभी मुझे पीने पीनी पड़ेगी, कोई बात नहीं। मैंने एक्चुअली मेरे शो में एक एपिसोड 200 था, जिसके लिए मेरे सारे गेस्ट ने मुझे सवाल पूछे और मुझे जवाब देना पड़ा, तो वो 5 घंटा चला। तो अगर मैं अपनी बैक स्टोरी पे चला गया तो काफ़ी टाइम लगता है, लेकिन आपने इनवाइट किया है तो लेट मी काइंड ऑफ गो इनटू इट अ लिटिल बिट। So basically I was born and brought up in Chandigarh in the early years. My dad was an IAS officer, obviously extremely privileged childhood in that sense. And so my childhood was in the pre-liberalization years. College, when I was in college, that's kind of when liberalization happened. तो मैं ऑलवेज मेरा अट्रैक्शन था क्रिएटिव फील्ड्स की तरफ। तो आई वांटेड टू बी अ राइटर, और उन दिनों तो कुछ पता नहीं था ना, इंटरनेट नहीं था, ये नहीं था। आई लाइक रीडिंग अ लॉट, बट मतलब कि देन व्हाट डू यू डू एज अ करियर, वो सवाल उठता है। तो मैंने सोचा कि ठीक है, मैं एडवर्टाइजिंग में कॉपी राइटर करूँगा। सो आई बिकेम सो आफ्टर ग्रेजुएशन इन 94 आई वर्कड फॉर अ ईयर इन दिल्ली in a company called HTA, which is now known as J. Walter Thompson. It was at that time India का नंबर 1 था। तो वहाँ पे मैंने कुछ महीने काम किए, लेकिन कुछ जमा नहीं। आई डेंट फील गुड, एंड एट दैट टाइम चैनल वी आया था इंडिया में, और चैनल वी का क्विक गन मुरुगन बहुत रेज बन गया था। लोगों को याद होगा। तो आई थॉट कि वहाँ बहुत मतलब क्रिएटिव स्पेस है, मुझे वहाँ जाना है। तो मैं बॉम्बे आ गया फिर। और एंड इट वाज वेरी नाइस, मतलब बहुत, मतलब कि आपको जो लकी ब्रेक्स मिलती है ना, वैसे लकी ब्रेक मिला। फ्राइडे को आया, मंडे वाज माय फ्राइडे को आया, फ़ोन कॉल किया, डू यू हैव अ वैकेंसी, मंडे वाज माय फर्स्ट डे एट वर्क। मतलब बिल्कुल वैसा था, स्मूथ हो था, बहुत लकी था। तो वहाँ मैंने 2.5 साल काम किए, फिर एमटीवी में 2.5 साल काम किए, फिर टीवी से मेरा मन उठ गया। फिर मैंने कुछ एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप ट्राई की, लेकिन उन दिनों नैस्डैक क्रैश हुआ था, तो वो भी फ्लॉप हो गया। तो उसके बाद आई गॉट इनटू जर्नलिज्म. I joined a company called Wisdom, which then bought Cricinfo, which we later sold to ESPN. So I was a managing editor at Cricinfo for a few years. तो तब क्या था, अर्ली 2000s में, 2003 2004 मेरा था कि आई डोंट जस्ट वांट टू राइट अबाउट क्रिकेट। तो और क्या करें अब, मतलब स्कोप कहाँ है। सो देन आई स्टार्टेड ब्लॉगिंग. आई स्टार्टेड अ ब्लॉग कॉल्ड इंडिया अनकट, व्हिच वेरी सून बिकेम रियली पॉपुलर, एंड आई वुड डू 5 पोस्ट अ डे। तो मतलब अब 5 साल वो एक्टिव था। उतने टाइम में मैंने कुछ 8,000 पोस्ट किए, और वहाँ पे मेरी फिलॉसफी थी कि जो फ्रीडम मिलती है उस न्यू फॉर्म से, उसको एक्सप्लॉइट करो। क्योंकि क्या है कि अगर आप जर्नलिज्म में काम कर रहे हो, तो आपके फॉर्मेट्स रहते हैं कि आर्टिकल 800 वर्ड की होती है, या वट एवर फिक्स्ड फॉर्मेट्स रहते रहते हैं। ब्लॉगिंग कर रहे हो तो 80 वर्ड करो, 8,000 वर्ड करो, कोई रोकने वाला नहीं है, कोई टोकने वाला नहीं है, कोई गेट कीपर्स नहीं है कि ये हमारी हाउस स्टाइल है, आप ये शब्द इस्तेमाल नहीं कर सकते, वैसे बोलने वाला कोई नहीं है। सो यू कैन फाइंड योर ओन वॉइस। आपको न्यूज़ साइकिल नहीं फॉलो करना है। आप देखेंगे सारे जो पब्लिकेशंस है अभी तो बहुत ये मतलब हाइपर सॉर्ट ऑफ टॉपिकल हो गए हैं कि जो अभी ट्विटर पे ट्रेंड कर रहा है उस पे स्टोरी बनाना है। बट इवन उन दिनों मतलब जो न्यूज़ पे है उस पे आप लिखो नहीं, अदरवाइज दिस थिंग। बट ब्लॉग्स में वैसा कुछ नहीं है, यू कैन राइट अबाउट एनीथिंग, कुछ भी इंटरेस्टिंग लगा लिख लो। तो कुछ साल मैंने वो किया ब्लॉग पे, पीपल नोटिस माई राइटिंग, वॉल स्ट्रीट जर्नल गॉट मी टू राइट फॉर देम। मेरा मिंट में एक कॉलम था। अगेन आई वाज लकी टू गेट एन अवार्ड फॉर दैट ऑल्सो, बासिया प्राइज बोल के एक इंटरनेशनल अवार्ड है, 2 बार मिली। फिर 2000 एंड I wrote a bad book also, which I'm embarrassed about.
Mhm.
But in about 2009, 2010, I kind of started playing poker, and which poker, of course, is a game of skill, and I was just very attracted to the level of skill involved. तो 5 साल मैं प्रोफेशनल पोकर प्लेयर बन गया। क्योंकि मेरी लॉजिक क्या थी कि देखो ये माई ग्रेट पैशन सो फार हैज़ बीन राइटिंग, उससे तो पैसे बनते नहीं है ना। माई अदर ग्रेट पैशन इज पोकर, और पैसे बन रहे हैं, तो आई थॉट पोकर खेल लेता हूँ। तो 5 साल वो खेला। wrote a column on poker also for Economic Times, but apart from that सारी writing मैंने basically छोड़ दी। I was in another world। तो पूरी lifestyle बिल्कुल बदल गई। I stopped reading books, I stopped hanging out with my friends, and at one point I thought कि ठीक है, मतलब चल रहा है जैसा चल रहा है, but it's I felt that I need to go back to writing, go back to being creative and all that. And also the poker world can be a very ugly place, because एक level पे तो ये game of skill है, लेकिन और एक लेवल पे लाइक इट्स ऑन द इंटरसेक्शन ऑफ स्किल एंड एडिक्शन। तो मैं बहुत सारे लोगों से मैं मिला हूँ जो बेसिकली एडिक्टेड थे, और मतलब मैंने आई हैव सीन लाइव्स बीइंग डिस्ट्रॉयड, and that also affected me. And I thought ki, it just doesn't feel right because it's very zero sum. The only way you win in poker is if someone else loses, whereas life में उल्टी बात है, like आप और हम जो भी conversation कर रहे हैं, we are both benefiting from it. At the very least both of us are having a good time. We'll both get to learn things. So everything else in life is a positive sum game. So I thought let me come back to writing. कुछ savings बन गए थे तब तक. I thought कि ठीक है, कुछ देर के लिए काम नहीं करना पड़ेगा, let me come back to writing. एंड आई केम बैक टू राइटिंग, कॉलम शॉलम कर रहा था लोगों के लिए। उसके बाद पॉडकास्ट एक्सीडेंटली हो गया। एक नेटवर्क था, IVM नेटवर्क्स, सो दे गॉट इन टच एंड दे सेड व्हाई डोंट यू डू हैव एनी आइडियाज। एंड आई सेड ठीक है, मैं ज़्यादा कुछ कर नहीं रहा हूँ, एक्सपेरिमेंट कर लेता हूँ। तो मेरे मन में ये आया कि ठीक है, मेरे पास एक आइडिया था जो एक्चुअली यूट्यूब के लिए आइडिया था, कभी यूट्यूब पे किया नहीं, कॉल द सीन एंड द अनसीन। और उन दिनों इफ यू लुक एट द अर्ली एपिसोड्स, the focus was on mainly public policy, कि what are the intended effects and what are the unseen consequences, the unintended consequences। तो उस पे था, तो मुझे लगा लोगों का शॉर्ट अटेंशन स्पैन है, 10-10 मिनट के एपिसोड करेंगे और वो मतलब एक पॉइंट पे जो पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है वो बता देंगे। एंड देन ग्रेजुअली ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम आई रियलाइज कि जो भी मैं पॉडकास्टिंग के बारे में सोचता था सब गलत था। मेरे इंप्रेशन से कि लोगों के शॉर्ट अटेंशन स्पैन है, कि मतलब आपको 15 सेकंड में हुक करना है, और आपको मतलब रेगुलरली कुछ मसाला देना है, और 20 मिनट से ज़्यादा तो करना ही नहीं है। एंड आई रियलाइज ऑल दैट इज़ रॉन्ग। नंबर ऑफ रीजंस, वन इज़ कि लोग पॉडकास्ट सुनते हैं रियली स्मार्टफोन पे, और वो 3 सिचुएशन में सुनते हैं, विच इज़ व्हेन दे आर कम्यूटिंग, व्हेन दे आर वर्किंग आउट, एंड व्हेन दे आर डूइंग एरेंड्स। सो तीनों सिचुएशन में दे आर अ कैप्टिव ऑडियंस, दे हैव चोजन टू लिसन टू यू, and they won't get distracted. Like अगर मैं YouTube पे कुछ वीडियो दिख रहा हूँ, I can click on another tab, I can turn my head and talk to someone, I can pick up a book. But if I'm jogging outside and listening to something, I'm a captive audience. The second thing I realized is that people listen at double speed. Like our brains can comprehend language at 500 words a minute, लेकिन जब हम बात करते हैं, हम मतलब 160 और 200 के बीच में बात करते हैं। मेरा 160 170 होगा, मैं थोड़ा बूढ़ा हो गया हूँ तो स्लो बोलता हूँ। सो देयरफॉर ब्रेन में वो स्पेयर कैपेसिटी है कि वो बहुत इजीली हायर स्पीड्स पे सुन सकता है, और जो रेगुलर सुनते हैं वो डबल स्पीड ट्रिपल स्पीड पे सुनते हैं। और उससे क्या होता है कि जो 1 घंटे का शो है वो आधे घंटे में ख़त्म हो जाता है। अगर आप 3 घंटे का कॉन्वर्जेशन करोगे, वो 1.5 घंटे में ख़त्म हो गया, और शायद उससे भी जल्दी, डिपेंडिंग ऑन द स्पीड यू लिसन टू इट एट। एंड तीसरी रियलाइजेशन जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट है, जो आपने भी देखा होगा, कि पीपल क्रेव डेप्थ। ये बिल्कुल सही नहीं है कि पीपल के शॉर्ट अटेंशन स्पैन है, हर चीज़ में साउंड बाइट चाहिए, ऑल ऑफ दैट। वो मतलब कि ट्विटर की दुनिया है, लेकिन पीपल एक्चुअली क्रेव डेप्थ। लाइक देयर आर टाइम्स वेयर आई एम सर्फिंग ट्विटर, मेरा अटेंशन स्पैन शॉर्ट है, बट देयर आर टाइम कि मुझे कुछ सब्जेक्ट को समझना है यार, मुझे बैठ के किताब पढ़ना है, मुझे बैठ के पॉडकास्ट सुनना है, मुझे आई वांट टू गो डीप। एंड दैट 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 हंगर फॉर डेप्थ इज़ वेरी कॉमन, और बहुत कम मीडिया है जो उसको प्रोवाइड करती है, क्योंकि आप पूरी मीडिया को देखेंगे, television, newspapers, mainstream media, they are, as my friend Prem Panikar says, mile, they are a mile broad and an inch deep. So therefore, I kind of fell in love with the long format, and I realized that the long format is really beautiful because, I developed a bunch of sort of rules for myself, like कभी interrupt नहीं करना है, actually सुनना है. Like Stephen Covey once said that people listen to respond, not to understand. And that's a very bad habit. And these days, when I watch interviews and people are interrupting all the time, and I feel really pissed off at that kind of thing. Because once your guest gets into the groove, you got to just let him go. Otherwise, if you keep interrupting him, as so many anchors do, वो बहुत shallow level पे रह जाता है, वो घुस नहीं पाते ठीक से। तो मेरा एथिक है कि आप गेस्ट के साथ बैठो, उनको कंफर्टेबल करो, और डीप जाओ, लेट देम रोल, एंड यू लर्न सो मच लाइक दैट इफ यू आर रियली लिसनिंग। सो ऐसे नहीं कि आपके पास 10 क्वेश्चन है, क्वेश्चन 1 आपने पूछा, फिर द मोमेंट आंसर फिनिशेस क्वेश्चन 2 पूछा। वो बिल्कुल गलत तरीका है। द राइट वे इज यू हैव अ बंच ऑफ थीम्स यू वांट टू कवर, लेकिन एक बार कॉन्वर्जेशन शुरू हो गई, you let it go to whatever direction, and you can look back on your notes and cover all the themes anyway, but you kind of let it go. So I found that very satisfying. I found that the love and support I've got from my listeners is massive. The kind of engagement that I get, how the show means so much to so many people, and the kind of feedback and responses I get really makes me feel that that's a biggest satisfaction. So yeah, संक्षिप्त में, I hope my pronunciations aren't wrong, मुझे माफ कीजिए, I'm trying my best. संक्षिप्त में ये मेरी कहानी है.
तो आपने मुझे कम से कम 10 थ्रेड दिए हैं यहाँ पे, ठीक है, तो
अच्छा.
मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि सारे हम कवर कर सके.
हम्म.
एक्चुअली आपके पॉडकास्ट का इन्फ्लुएंस ऑन लाइट्स कैमरा आजादी में बताता हूँ. तो लाइट्स कैमरा आजादी शुरू करा फेब में, आपका पॉडकास्ट सुनता था, फिर देखा कि यार और कौन से पॉडकास्ट है होते और सुनते, मैं पुलियाबाजी सुना, ये पुलियाबाजी भी बढ़िया है. फिर मैंने बोला अच्छा और कौन सा पॉडकास्ट सुनते हैं, तो फिर मैंने सुना नॉलेज प्रोजेक्ट, सुना शेन पेरिश. तो तीनों पॉडकास्ट का अगर एवरेज देखेंगे तो 1 घंटा एवरेज तीनों का है, और आपका थोड़ा ज्यादा है, पुलियाबाजी का एवरेज और दोनों का एवरेज वही है. तो मुझे क्या लगा कि पॉडकास्ट होते हैं 1-1.5 घंटे के, और जो
अच्छा.
और जो छोटे पॉडकास्ट होते हैं वो ऐसे ही टाइम पास है, वो शायद इतने, मतलब दे आर नॉट रियली पॉडकास्ट, वो लोग ऐसे ही कर रहे हैं. तो जब मैंने पहला एपिसोड रिलीज करा वो 1 घंटे का था. तो दैट इज वेल आई लाइक यू स्टार्टेड लाइक 20 मिनट्स, और 20-30 मिनट्स का आपका था. एंड नाउ ये हुआ है कि मैं लाइक द वन ऑफ द लेटेस्ट एपिसोड्स आई डिड विद पवर मेघवंशी जी, उनके साथ जो गया कुछ 200 मिनट का गया था. तो मैं 50th एपिसोड तक ही यहाँ तक पहुंच गया हूँ, इसमें आपका बहुत बड़ा योगदान है, मैं बस आपको ये बताना चाह रहा हूँ. क्योंकि मैंने शुरू में मेरी जर्नी जब शुरू हुई तो आई वाज लिसनिंग टू यू अ लॉट, टिल डेट आई डू.
थैंक यू. तो अगर अगर पंडित के कुछ लिसनर्स हैं जो मुझे ब्लेम करेंगे कि अरे इतने लंबे क्यों है, तो प्लीज क्षमा चाहता हूँ. नहीं, बट या नो, नाउ माय एपिसोड्स गो फॉर 4 hours 5 hours.
Yeah.
They go that long. And see, this is one thing I keep telling creators इस न्यू इकोनॉमी में, क्रिएटर्स इकोनॉमी में, कि पहले की क्या था कि वी वर लिमिटेड बाय फॉर्म. ठीक है, तो अगर मैं 1990s में अगर मुझे लिखना है किसी के लिए, टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया के लिए लिखना है, किसी को पीसेस भेजने हैं, या तो मैं 800 वर्ड का कॉलम करूँ या मैं 100,000 वर्ड्स का बुक्स करूँ. फिल्म मेकर अगर बनना है तो 24 मिनट की टीवी एपिसोड होती है, नहीं तो 90 मिनट की हॉलीवुड फिल्म, 3 घंटे की बॉलीवुड फिल्म. बट ऑल ऑफ दीज अरोज बिकॉज ऑफ फिजिकल लिमिटेशंस. लाइक लोग कहते हैं म्यूजिक में एल्बम. अभी एल्बम क्या चीज़ है? एल्बम का लेंथ 44 मिनट्स क्यों स्टैंडर्ड था? क्योंकि जो पहली एलपी रिकॉर्ड बनी थी उसमें वो फिजिकल लिमिटेशन थी, उससे ज़्यादा गाने नहीं होते थे. तो एल्बम की वो लेंथ एक लिमिटेशन बन गई, और उसमें हर गाना 3 मिनट का क्यों होता है? वो 3 मिनट जो स्टैंडर्ड एक टाइम पे हुआ करता था, दैट वाज आल्सो फिजिकल लिमिटेशन, बिकॉज अर्ली 1900s में जो फर्स्ट डिस्क आया जिसपे आप रिकॉर्ड कर सकते हो, ईच साइड वाज 3 मिनट्स, और फिर वो रेडियो कन्वेंशन बन गया, राइट. एंड तो उस हिसाब से हम वी वर रिस्ट्रिक्टेड बाय फॉर्म. तो अभी मैं मॉडर्न क्रिएटर्स को क्या कहता हूँ कि आप डोंट थिंक दैट देर इज अ पर्टिकुलर फॉर्म कि इसका ये लेंथ होना चाहिए या ये फॉर्मेट होना चाहिए. All those physical restrictions are actually gone because of technology and internet. So don't let anyone tell you कि podcast को 5 मिनट होना चाहिए या 5 घंटा होना चाहिए या कुछ भी. Don't think in those terms. And I don't think that there is anything wrong in doing a 5 minute podcast or a 5 hour podcast. It depends on what you're trying to do. Like हर चीज़ की आप जो भी कोशिश कर रहे हो, हर चीज़ की एक अपनी natural length होती है. तो you can let it breathe and you can go there. और आई थिंक मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया वाले, जो मेन स्ट्रीम चैनल्स के गेट कीपर्स है, वो अभी तक ये समझ नहीं पाए. तो वो सिर्फ पुराने फॉर्मेट्स में सोचते हैं, पुराने कंटेंट के बारे में सोचते हैं. लेकिन दुनिया बदल गई है.
एक मेरे को एक क्विकली बिफोर आई गेट डीप डाइव इनटू आवर कॉन्वर्सेशन, एक क्विक क्वेश्चन आया मेरे को. एक क्वेश्चन नहीं था, इट्स मोर लाइक अ रिमार्क अमित, कि हमारा पॉडकास्ट मैकेनिज्म इज आल्सो सेफ दीज डेज फ्रॉम लोग, आप ट्वीट करने पे आप जेल जा सकते हो, बट मुझे नहीं लगता कि कोई आपका पॉडकास्ट सुनेगा 3 घंटा और फिर वो बोलेगा कि इसमें आपने ये गलत बोला और आप पे फिर यूएपी लगेगा वो. सो दैट इज आल्सो लाइक ऑन अ साइड नोट कि हम सेफ है काफी.
नहीं, उसका उसका एक कारण ये भी है कि जैसे ट्विटर पे बहुत वॉल्यूम है, ठीक है, बट मैं कहता हूँ कि पूरा जो नॉइज़ आता है ट्विटर पे, दैट कम्स फ्रॉम वोकल माइनॉरिटीज़. ज़्यादातर लोग एक साइलेंट मेजॉरिटी है जिन्होंने कोई एको चेम्बर चूज़ नहीं की है, जिन्होंने कोई आइडियोलॉजी चूज़ नहीं की है. वो ओपन है, क्यूरियस है, सुनना चाहते हैं, डिस्कवर करना चाहते हैं, लेकिन ट्विटर पे वो चुप है क्योंकि वहाँ पे तो मारा-मारी चलती है. तो अभी पॉडकास्ट के लिए लाइक मैंने जो देखा है, लाइक जो भी गेस्ट मेरे शो पे आते हैं, फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल, वो बार-बार कहते हैं कि योर लिसनर्स आर सो नाइस. क्योंकि जब भी मेरे लिसनर्स उनके साथ कम्युनिकेट करते हैं, इतनी पोलाइटली करते हैं, इतनी रिस्पेक्ट देते हैं, डिसएग्री भी करते हैं तो इतनी अच्छी तरह से बोलते हैं. तो क्यों? एंड दैट इज़ बिकॉज़ वो एंगेजमेंट वो है. ये सब लोग वो ट्विटर के चिल्लाने वाले नहीं हैं. ट्विटर के जो चिल्लाने वाले हैं ना, उनका अटेंशन स्पैन भी नहीं है कि वो 3 घंटा कोई भी चीज़ सुनेंगे या उस डेप्थ से सोचेंगे या उस नुआंस को अप्रिशिएट करेंगे. तो इन अ सेंस ये सिलेक्शन मैकेनिज़्म बन जाता है कि जो सोचने वाले लोग हैं, जो एक्चुअली चाहते हैं कॉन्वर्जेशंस, जो ओपन माइंडेड है, गुड फेथ में इंगेज करना चाहते हैं, तो वो अट्रैक्ट होते हैं पॉडकास्ट की तरफ।
हम्म। हमें थोड़ा सा प्री लिबरलाइजेशन डेज आपने कहा यू आर बॉट अप दैट टाइम, उसका टेल अस, वॉक अस थ्रू दैट, हाउ वाज इट, आपका स्कूल टाइम जनरली कैसा था, जॉब अपॉर्चुनिटीज, आपके घर के आसपास माहौल एटसेट्रा, व्हाट वाज द माइंडसेट एंड देन व्हाट चेंज्ड?
या सी, तो मतलब मेरी पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस जो है वो ऑब्वियसली बहुत ही प्रिविलेज थी। मेरे फादर आईएएस ऑफिसर थे, मैं बंगलो में रहता था, हमारे पास फ़ोन था, लेकिन बाहर की दुनिया बहुत अलग थी उससे। लाइक उन दिनों आई रिमेंबर 1980s में अगर आपको टेलीफोन लेना है तो 7-8 साल लग जाते थे, अनलेस आपके पास गवर्नमेंट में कोई पुल हो। लाइक आई रिमेंबर व्हेन आई वाज़ इन कॉलेज, व्हेन आई वाज़ इन जूनियर कॉलेज, वन डे अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन काइंड ऑफ ड्रॉप्ड होम एंड rang the bell, and she just said, I wanted to make an urgent phone call, I was passing by, may I use your phone? तो ऐसी थी। सो टुडे वी टेक ऑल ऑफ दिस फॉर ग्रांटेड कि इम कम्युनिकेट कर सकते हैं कभी भी, सबके पास फ़ोन है एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट। at that time it wasn't the case. Even it was a very elite people who could take all this for granted. और इन दोनों एक इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ थी कि अगर आपको कार चाहिए ना, तो अ सेकंड हैंड कार इज़ मोर एक्सपेंसिव देन अ न्यू कार, बिकॉज़ न्यू कार में वेटिंग पीरियड है, 6-7 साल साल लग सकते हैं। सो सेकंड हैंड कार वाज़ मोर एक्सपेंसिव देन अ न्यू कार बिकॉज़ ईज़ी अवेलेबिलिटी है, आपको इमीडिएटली मिल जाएगा। तो उन दिनों वैसी थी, और मतलब अपॉर्च्युनिटीज़ तो कुछ थी ही नहीं, बिकॉज़ बहुत स्टैंडर्ड था लोगों के लिए कि यूपीएससी करेंगे, नहीं तो इंजीनियरिंग, मेडिकल जो लकी है घुस सकते हैं इन द लिमिटेड कॉलेजेस दैट देयर आर, वो करेंगे। एमबीए तभी बहुत नया था रिलेटिवली 80s में। तो वैसा था। अब मेरा क्या था कि आई वाज़ आउट ऑफ दिस ग्रूव एंड माय पेरेंट्स काइंड ऑफ जस्ट इंडल्ज मी कि जो करना है आप करो। तो मुझे राइटर बनना था, तो मैं एडवर्टाइजिंग में गया, टेलीविज़न में गया, और डेफ़िनेटली बाय द टाइम टेलीविज़न में गया, पूरा इकोनॉमी खुल रहा था, अपॉर्च्युनिटीज़ बढ़ गए थे। फिर इंटरनेट आ गया। इंटरनेट भी बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट था बिकॉज़ हाउ डू यू एजुकेट योरसेल्फ? हाउ डू यू फॉर्म योर व्यू ऑफ द वर्ल्ड? पहले क्या होता था कि आपके पास लिमिटेड बुक्स अवेलेबल थी। तो कॉलेज में मैं जब था, मेरे हर चीज़ पे व्यूज़ कंप्लीटली डिफरेंट थे फ्रॉम व्हाट दे आर नाउ, यू नो कि क्योंकि कुछ आइडिया नहीं था, कुछ यू हैड नो एक्सेस टू बुक्स, यू हैड नो एक्सेस टू डिफरेंट आइडियाज़। सो आई वुड से दैट a lot of the views which I hold dear today are something that I really developed over time in my adulthood, combining what I saw in the world around me through my lived experience, combining that with all the different ideas that came at me. So, in a sense, I think मेरे generation के जो लोग हैं, like I'm 47, we got a double education. एक तो आपकी पहली जो education थी, जो होती है स्कूल कॉलेज में, और दूसरी education when the world opens up to you. And so today people kind of take for granted कि वो online जा रहे हैं, एवरीथिंग इज़ एट देयर फिंगर टिप्स। हमारी वो नहीं थी। और एक चीज़ इंटरेस्टिंग है कि जो एक थीम है, जो मैं रिसेंटली लोगों से बात करता हूँ, डिस्कवर करता हूँ, इज़ दैट जोनाथन हाइट ने इनफैक्ट ये ऑब्जर्वेशन की थी कि टुडे यंग पीपल हैव द वर्ल्ड ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन ओपन टू देम, राइट? तो ऑल द बुक्स, ऑल द म्यूजिक, ऑल द फिल्म, सब कुछ है फिंगर टिप्स, बट मोस्ट ऑफ द कंटेंट दे आर कंज्यूमिंग वाज प्रोड्यूस्ड इन द लास्ट 3 डेज, राइट? तो यूट्यूब पे जाते हैं लास्ट 3 डेज, जो भी नया है आपके फीड में, ट्विटर पे आप देखते हैं सब कुछ, जो भी लिंक्स है वो नए पीसेज है, नया सब कुछ है। सो वेयर यू वुड इमेजिन दैट दिस जनरेशन विल एक्चुअली हैव अ बेटर ब्रॉडर पर्सपेक्टिव, all of the past is available to them. Actually, they're always in the moment chasing the dopamine rush of the latest notification, the latest song, the latest whatever, which is quite interesting to me because I think there is something that comes with age, which is a certain kind of ठहराव जैसे शब्द है। तो एक लाइक मेरे लिए द मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंट थिंग फॉर मी इज़ टू चेंज फ्रॉम अ यंग एंड रेस्टलेस पर्सन टू समवन हू हैज़ अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ ठहराव, जो इंट्रोस्पेक्ट कर सके, जो सेल्फ क्रिटिसिज्म कर सके। एंड आई वरी कि आज के ज़माने में पेस ही इतना है that ठहराव is becoming hard to develop. You're always getting carried away by the flood of information and knowledge and content that is just coming at you.
Can you also talk a little bit, Amit, about how was like childhood कैसा था आपका? IAS officer, क्या आप घर you're son of an IAS officer, so how did it impacted you? What were your early experiences and memories that shaped you eventually, that shaped, let's say, an Amit of 20-25 year old?
So like, see, I was lucky enough to have thousands of books at home because my dad was into books and all of that. So I read a lot. And so I was very fortunate that way, and I was also fortunate to be able to watch a lot of movies because my dad was into that as well, to world cinema vagera sab dekh liya. So in that kind of exposure I was very fortunate, but I think I took a long time to be formed, in a sense. Like the person I am now was not being formed then. A different person was being formed whom I don't really like so much. And I had to, and the thing is, if social media existed when I was 21, 22, I'd be posting all kinds of nonsense on Twitter, and I would be stuck to those positions, because once you take a position, you feel defensive when you are attacked and you harden down and all of that. Luckily, that social media nahi tha, to kisi ko pata nahi. But so I had a very slow growing up process in that sense as a person. And I like, this is one question I always ask guests of my age, that tell me about how the different layers fell away from you. Because as you go through life, like especially if you're living in a privileged bubble and you come out of that bubble and you see one by one different layers begin to fall off as you see that there is life outside that bubble that you were in. And I think throughout my life there has been a process of different kinds of layers falling away. Like on one hand there is a layer of what the real India is like for people, and far worse pre-liberalization than today, far worse. And you also have the layer where you realize how lucky you are to be male in this world, right? Because as a male, I don't have to think twice before going out for a walk at night or before getting into a lift with five people. But women always carry this extra layer of awareness with them. So just being aware ki aisa hai sort of also shapes the way that you look at the world. I mean, these are just two broad examples, but I think over time different kinds of layers fall away. Like even in modern times, even if I am to look at what has been happening in the last 6 7 years, there is a layer you grow up in where you believe that your default condition is a broadly liberal, tolerant, secular condition. All of these divisions don't matter. But I think if there is one thing that we should have realized by the events of the last few years, is that we were wrong. We were in our
Yeah.
little elite bubble and we didn't realize ki, what is this country. And and I understand that India, like all of us, contains multitudes, and there are many sides to it, and there are many liberal aspects of India. But there are also some very deeply illiberal aspects of India, and I think these fissures that we today see and can ascribe to this politics, I think they were there under the surface in our society for decades, and I think it is only now that politics has caught up with society. So yeah, I think that's kind of. The final layer, if I mean, I'm sure there'll be more layers and more ways in which we can expand the way we see, but this is the most painful realization, because इस पे लगता है कि कुछ आपका कुछ कंट्रोल नहीं है, like it's just something very much bigger than you.
Yep. So then this also gives me the cue to ask this very ultimate question that you always ask. Do you think then that a liberal constitution is imposed on an illiberal population of this country?
No, see, the thing is, first of all, the constitution is not as liberal as I would like it to be in terms of protecting individual rights. But two, it is much more liberal than society. And I think this was a problem that the founders grappled with, and they even realized. Because the big question is that are you imposing, if you're imposing a liberal constitution on an illiberal people, can that imposition be liberal? Because any imposition, by definition, there's a problem there. And Gandhi recognized this. Gandhi said that you have to change society from within. Ambedkar recognizes. Ambedkar, in fact, said that the constitution is a topsoil. It is only a topsoil, and there is much more to be done. But I think there was this naive belief in those days that society can be changed from the top down. And I think that belief was wrong. I think that belief was dangerous. I think that belief made us complacent. It made us think that, ye constitution hai, and we are fine, and all of that. But I think that complacence was wrong. I think the truth is that you cannot change a society from the top down. Eventually bottom up always wins. And as that saying goes, politics is downstream of culture. So the challenge was articulated correctly by Gandhi and recognized by Ambedkar, that you have to change society, you have to change our culture. And that never happened, and I think it's possible, but it never really happened. And that's part of the reason that we are where we are today.
अमित लेटली आप ना ट्विटर पे काफी वोकल हो गए हो, मैं पिछले मेरे एक साल से ऑब्जर्व कर रहा हूँ. एंड मैंने ये बहुत डिस्टिंक्टली मैं ऑब्जर्व कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे को अच्छे से याद है, आई डोंट रिमेम्बर यू टेकिंग पोजिशंस, स्पेशली आई थिंक 1-2 साल पहले तक तो याद नहीं था मुझे दैट यू आर टेकिंग पोजिशंस, बिकॉज मैंने आपका ट्विटर देखा था, स्कैन वैन करता था, मैं देखता था, तो ऐसा लगता नहीं था कि आप कोई यू आर कमेंटिंग ऑन, अगर कहीं पे फॉर एग्जांपल कहीं पे नमाज कहीं पे रोक दी गई या एनी सिमिलर इशू हो रहा है, आप शायद उस पर कमेंट नहीं करते थे, बट आई हैव लेटली स्टार्टेड यू सीइंग दैट maybe you have started to get more agitated lately, or maybe you sort of now you are using your influence to sort of push the narrative of which you think is right. Is my observation correct? ये सही है, थोड़ा सा आप ज्यादा vocal हुए lately?
नहीं, आई थिंक ये उल्टी बात है। आई थिंक दिस इज़ एक्चुअली द रीसेंसी इफेक्ट इन प्ले कि आपने रिसेंटली नोटिस किया होगा और पहले नोटिस नहीं किया होगा। बट आई वाज़ इन फैक्ट आई एम फार लेस वोकल नाउ। आई यू नो माय एटीट्यूड दीज़ डेज़ समटाइम्स इज़ लाइक काशी का अस्सी में काशीनाथ सिंह जी हैड रिटन कि भाड़ में जाए दुनिया हम बजाए हारमोनिया।
Hmm.
So that is a little bit of my attitude these days where I'm actually less vocal because क्या पॉइंट है, यू नो कभी कभार कुछ नॉनसेंस होता है तो मैं लिख देता हूँ, बट अदरवाइज हु वांट्स टू गेट इनटू अ फाइट ऑन ट्विटर विद शैलो फूल्स, बिकॉज दैट इज बेसिकली द डोमेन ऑफ ट्विटर, राइट? सो and I was very vocal before this. Like, you know, when demonetization happened, I was literally the first person who actually wrote columns against it. You know, एक हफ्ते में मैंने 2-3 कॉलम लिख दिए, फिर एपिसोड्स किए. In fact, my Times of India column was sort of retweeted by everyone, Gandhi, Kejriwal, all of them. So I was, I think, the most vocal voice against Demon when it happened, for example, which was good because what happened then was that massive trolling हुई. एंड माय रिस्पॉन्स टू ट्रोलिंग इज कि आप ब्लॉक करो, आप बैठ के आधा दिन लगाओ, whoever has been rude to you ब्लॉक कर दो एक बार के लिए. And that was great because I've realized that there's a finite number of trolls and troll accounts out there. Once you block a certain critical mass of them, it's hard for them to troll you again. तो सिंस देन यू नो उतनी ट्रोलिंग वहाँ से आती नहीं है क्योंकि सभी ब्लॉक है, तो क्या करेंगे बेचारे. But yeah, I was pretty vocal, and even in my blogging days, I was incredibly vocal, and I've always been vocal against the government in power. So obviously, pre 2014, I was vocal against the people in power because I think what journalists do is you speak truth to power. That's what you need to do. You know, if the government changes tomorrow, I'll be critical of the new government, and you would have noticed that even today, I'm critical of all parties. But the point is, who is the greatest danger to you right now? It's the people in power. So obviously, जाहिर सी बात है कि उनको ही criticize करोगे. But you know, in this context, I'll say one more thing, that I feel that there are three broad problems in India, and one of them is a proximate problem and two of them are ultimate problems or deeper problems. The proximate problem is the party in power. Okay, so I don't like the way Modi and then Shah have run this country in the last 7 years. I'm quite vocal about that. I'm quite vocal about why that's a proximate problem. But we also have two ultimate problems that go beyond these. One of them is the nature of the oppressive state. The point is that for understandable reasons we designed an oppressive state which basically, you know, continued ruling us, and not serving us but ruling us in the way that the colonial British Empire did. And therefore in many ways we are less free than we were under the British. And and you see, and all of this oppression has been normalized. And the point is we need to recognize this, and this is a problem that now goes beyond any political party. Like people say, oh, so and so have you know, Modi has arrested so and so under the sedition law. But the point is, the
वो
sedition
डिजाइन
law
कर,
is also a
या
problem. Like 1950 mein, the Supreme Court, or I think the Patna High Court, my friend Alok Prasanna Kumar corrected me recently, the Patna High Court had ruled the sedition law to be unconstitutional. Jawaharlal Nehru brought it back with the First
फर्स्ट
Amendment
अमेंडमेंट, या
because of political reasons. He wanted to teach the communists a lesson, and he wanted to shut down some magazine, I think. So you know, and this misuse of the power of the state has been happening all the while. And also we think of the constitution sometimes as a holy book, and that's a bit of a joke. Ek purani cartoon ad that a guy goes to the parliament bookshop and asks for a copy of the constitution, and the storekeeper says, sir, we only stock books, not periodicals. The constitution has been changed more than 100 times, starting with Nehru. And Nehru's game plan, which was followed over by every prime minister since, was that the moment the court says something is unconstitutional, they change the constitution. हो गया जादू, अब करो जो करना है, right? So this is the first of the ultimate problems, the oppressive nature of the state, and the second is the nature of society, where People talk about this regime fomenting divisions in society and anti-Muslim feeling and all of that. But honestly, these divisions have been in society for longer than the BJP has existed. They've always been there. That's a deeper social problem. Even if the BJP goes tomorrow, this social problem is not going to go away. And you can see that from the way that even the Aam Aadmi Party and even the Congress play their soft Hindutva games, and they'll, wo sab chalta rahega. So this is the second ultimate problem. And these two problems, the oppressive nature of the state and the divisive nature of society, is not something that you can attribute only to one political party. So yeah, so these are the three big problems as I see them today.
So अमित, yes, I agree to this fact that आपने जो ये बात बोली, बट इसमें एक बात बताओ आप, तो आपको ये लगता है कि अगर बीजेपी कल को कुछ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन भी चेंज करना चाहती तो है ही वो, और भी कर भी देती है, सो डू यू थिंक इट वुड नॉट मैटर एज सच, बिकॉज द आर्गुमेंट वुड बी कि यार ये तो नेहरू के टाइम से होते हुए आ रहे हैं.
No, I don't think that's the argument. I think the point is, we any change to the constitution they make would be in a bad direction, right? You and I would not like it.
Hmm.
So I think the important thing is to do two things. One is you oppose that change if it's not in a direction you want. But the second is that you also oppose the fact that the constitution can constantly be mangled like this. There is a proximate problem, which is a particular change they might suggest, but there is also a deeper problem. And honestly, I don't know how the deeper problem can be solved. And I don't I'm proximate problem theek hai, ho jayega. Things happen in politics. A week is a long time in politics, as they say. Unknown unknowns. Your party in power can change, anything can happen. My worry is, what do you do about the deeper problems? Like, kal agar Kejriwal ya Mamta ban jaye PM, they could be worse PMs. And they could be worse PMs in exactly the same direction as this man. So there is because Indian politics attracts moral sociopaths. That is just what it is. So so the fight has to be at multiple levels. It is a particular thing. You can't just give up tomorrow if they're changing the constitution to say, for example, to make Muslims second class citizens. You can't give up. You have to fight. Um, but at the same time, you also need to look at, for example, why is it so easy to amend the constitution? Why is the constitutions? I mean, they won't even need to change the constitution because they can make it irrelevant, and it is already such a hodgepodge of things. Like, what will they change? We already have no free speech, right? We already, most of our rights have caveats, and they are curtailed in different ways. Already the oppressive state machinery is there to do their bidding, to throw Sudha Bhardwaj in jail while they make Pragya Thakur an MP. Already all that is happening. So, they don't need to change anything. They're getting what they want.
एंड हाउ डू यू रिस्पॉन्ड व्हेन पीपल से कि, एंड स्पेशली ये शायद कंजर्वेटिव सेक्शन से ज्यादा ये वॉइस आती होगी कि यार इंडिया में आपको इतना बोलने को मिल तो रहा है, दूसरी कंट्रीज में तो मिल भी नहीं रहा था. You look at Pakistan, look at this, look at that, and they would point out to 10 different regressive countries and regressive constitution. So how what is your response typically to that?
My response is, आप कहते हो कि somebody might listen to this and say कि Vandit आप free हो, Amit आप free हो. आप podcast में बात कर रहे हो, जो भी कर रहे हो. But is Sudha Bhardwaj free? I mean, she was out on bail recently, but is she free? Siddiq Kapan is still in jail. Are the people of Kashmir free? जो 1.5 साल से उनको internet नहीं मिला. Are the people of Nagaland free? Do they feel that way? Is everybody free? Look, the point is that what you want a strong constitution to do in a democratic republic is protect the rights of every individual. That doesn't happen in theory, that doesn't happen in practice. That's just a fact. Now, I agree that we are not as bad as Pakistan, or you can say कि अरे इतने Islamic republics है, उनमें इतनी कम freedom है. Fine, I agree with that. But why should we hold that as a standard? Why should we say that Pakistan is our enemy, therefore let us be more like Pakistan? Or why should we say that, hey, at least we are better than them? We should hold ourselves to higher standards. Why and therefore that does it is something that kind of concerns me. So I get it. We are not there yet. Like, I was chatting with a friend the other day who was saying that this is worse than the emergency, and I was saying, no, you haven't studied the emergency. The emergency was really bad. The entire opposition was in jail. One that both you and I would be in jail today if we were in 1976. So it isn't that bad, but it's damn bad. And you got to speak out. The directionality is also bad. कि कहाँ पे ये जा रहा है, क्या trend line है. And also at the end of the day, it is not about how free the privileged like us might feel. It is also on what is happening on the ground. That you know. So you look at what happened to Stan Swami, or you look at Siddiq Kapan still in jail. Look at, I mean, the examples are endless here. We know this. So I'm not sure how much water that really holds.
Hmm. नो एब्सोल्युटली एंड ये सब बहुत रिटोरिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में लोग बात करते हैं कि मतलब जस्ट टू किल द आर्ग्यूमेंट, बट ऑल्सो अमित, आपने कभी इस बारे में सोचा कि वाई आर मैसिव यंगस्टर्स योर एज माई एज who may have relatively progressive viewpoints on LGBTQ, they would identify with Black Lives Matter, or they would have some, some they may probably like Obama of the old times. Why are these people still supporting them? What is your take on that? मतलब आपको क्या लगता है ऐसा वो लोग क्यों सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं?
I don't know, yaar. You are younger than me, so you're closer to the problem. So maybe, so I'll turn this question back on you. But before that, I would say that I don't know. It's a mess of complex factors. But what I always say is this: like when I see other parties also trying to appeal, play the Hindutva card and all of that, what I always say is that everybody contains multitudes. That within one individual, there might be a 23-year-old today, for example, who has some anti-Muslim bias for whatever reason, or who supports Modi for whatever reason, and that is one side of his personality. But there's another side of his personality who likes Western culture in some way or the other, wants to listen to English music, likes hip hop. There might be another side of his personality where he says that, damn it, I want a good job, like what is this shit, where are the opportunities? So people have multiple sides to them, and everybody is going after just that one aspect, that one divisive tribal aspect. But there are aspects to other there are other aspects there. And I think what political parties and storytellers and narrators need to figure out is, how do you appeal to what Steven Pinker might call the better angels of their natures? That instead of just appealing to that same sort of tribal side of this, how do you appeal to other instincts? That, hey, I want more opportunities, I want my kids to have more opportunities, I want to grow up in a place where one is not unsafe all the time, where there are different kinds of freedom. So I think that there is, so I hold belief that even somebody who supports a BJP today is not necessarily a bad person. That is one aspect of their personality which the BJP has managed to appeal to. And if we don't agree with that, then the challenge is on us to kindle other fires within them, where which might go in different directions.
Hmm. Now, since you have turned the question back to me, I will try to answer it. तो अमित, मुझे क्या लगता है ना, उसमें दो तीन चार एंगल्स है. एक एंगल तो डेफिनेटली ये है कि मोदी हैज गिवन देम एन एस्पिरेशन, और बहुत एस्पिरेशनल है मोदी का बीजेपी, and people want to be associated with it because see these bridges, see the bullet train, see the vikas, and see India ka naam, and see the kind of events I'm doing, ki I'm going into Times Square and Madison Square, and people are coming to it. So subconsciously people, this is a sign of also like a populist leader, that people want to be like him, people want to associate with him, people want to associate with that brand. तो मुझे लगता है यंगस्टर्स को काफी वो चीज अट्रैक्ट करती है. सेकंड, राहुल वर्मा जब आपके पॉडकास्ट पे आए थे फॉर द डिक्लाइन ऑफ कांग्रेस, उन्होंने बहुत अच्छी बात बोली थी, कि ड्यूरिंग द एंटी करप्शन मूवमेंट ऑफ 2011-12, and I think Congress party does not realizes this as deeply as they should, and you will also agree that they lost legitimacy. The legitimacy lose karna is not a joke. The moment you have lost being the legitimate person, the legitimate party, then you have created such a massive vacuum that उसको fill करना मतलब then आपको legitimacy gain, उनको freedom movement लग गया था to become the legitimate force of power. Now imagine what it require for them to gain legitimacy. So second is the point of legitimacy. थर्ड, मुझे ये लगता है कि यंगस्टर्स में जैसे मेरे जैसे लोग हैं और थोड़े आपके जनरेशन के लोग हैं जिनके लिए राइट्स, वैल्यूज, ये सब चीजें, फ्रीडम, एक्सप्रेशन, जो लिबरल वैल्यूज हमने देखी है स्पेसिफिकली, वो शायद उनके लिए इतनी इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है. उनके लिए उनकी कहीं न कहीं उनकी कंज़र्वेटिव वैल्यूज़, वो जैसा आप बोल रहे हो वो हिप हॉप सुनते हैं, सब करते हैं। वो देव कोबे ब्रायंट को फॉलो करेंगे, उन सबको फॉलो करेंगे। बट कहीं न कहीं उनकी जो कंज़र्वेटिव वैल्यूज़ हैं वो, या ऑर्थोडॉक्स वैल्यूज़ हैं, वो इंटैक्ट हैं। उन्हें अभी भी, मतलब उनके लिए अभी भी उनकी जिस वो सोसाइटी में, जिस सोसाइटी से आते हैं, जिस कास्ट से वो आते हैं, जिस लोकेशन से वो आते हैं, उसकी डिग्निटी को मेंटेन करना, उसकी रिस्पेक्ट को मेंटेन करना, अपने ट्रेडिशनल फैमिली वैल्यूज को होल्ड करके रखना, ये एक मैंने नोटिस करा है कि ये उन्होंने अभी तक उसको शेड नहीं करा है। बिकॉज एक और बात जो मुझे लगती है कि टू बिकम अ फाइंडिंग अ प्रोग्रेसिव वैल्यू, यू नीड टू कॉन्शियसली शेड रिग्रेसिव वैल्यूज या ओल्ड वैल्यूज या कंजर्वेटिव नॉर्म्स। यू हैव टू डिनाई कि ये मैं नहीं करूंगा। तो ये मैसिव जनरेशन में, मेरी जनरेशन में लोगों का वो ऐसा आया नहीं है कि उनने बोला कि ये मैं अब नहीं करूंगा, या मैं ये छोड़ रहा हूँ, या आई एम लीविंग दीज वैल्यूज एंड आई एम अडॉप्टिंग न्यू वैल्यूज। सो आई हैव नेवर सीन दिस ट्रेंड happening in, my generation. And and fourth and the final aspect has been that there has not been a very strong left or a liberal movement in India in from as long as I could recall. मुझे तो नहीं पता कि जिसको मैं बोल सकूं कि यार ये बड़ा एक लिबरल प्रोग्रेसिव मूवमेंट था और जिसने सोसाइटी को एक, मतलब एक नया डायरेक्शन दिया है। तो वहां पे भी एक गैप है। तो दिस इज माय सॉर्ट ऑफ अ बेसिक न्यूआंस्ड व्यू कि यार इसलिए मेरी जनरेशन शायद यही है, मतलब जो है वो है।
Yeah, yeah, damn thought provoking. I've in fact noted these down. So just to sort of give my like off the cuff responses to them. One, you're right. That's an important point Rahul made about the Congress losing legitimacy, and that definitely happened. And one thing that we have to realize is that one of the reasons Modi won with such a thumping win in 2014 was not just the appeal of Modi himself, but also what had come before. So it wasn't just a pull factor that people are pulled towards Modi. It was a push factor that they were disgusted at the Congress. It was both push and pull. And that's definitely there and undeniable. Now, I want to focus for a moment on the third of the four factors you pointed out, which was one that youngsters don't care so much about rights and that they are conservative. Now, I'm going to quibble a bit about the word conservative because if you look at it in one way, the BJP is actually not a conservative party, it is a radical party. And the way to think about this is what are our traditions. Now, it is true, like I remember in episode 149 of my show with JP Narayan, I put forth the notion that, look, in my view, India is an illiberal country because of the way we treat our women, because of the caste system, because of this, because of that, many reasons. And he said that that is all correct. He agreed with me. But he said that if you look at it another way, it's actually liberal because in our lived reality we assimilate everything. We are a khichdi of everything. You look at our food, you look at our clothes, you look at our languages, it's all an assimilation of everything. So you could say that in our lived reality we are actually quite liberal in many ways as well. Now my point is that this deeper liberalism which we can speak to, which is very heartening, which which is something that does make me love India more, is this that this is also a tradition that we carry, this tradition of just embracing everything. Like there is this famous story of when the Parsis came to Gujarat and they were met at the border by the representative of the king, and the king wanted to indicate that there is no place for Parsis there. So the messenger, he held up this a glass full of milk. So it was filled with milk. There was no space for anything else. And the Parsi gentleman apparently smiled and put a little bit of sugar in there, and it just blended with the milk, right? And probably an apocryphal story, but I love the story because this indicates what really kind of happens in our society. So the argument is that if part of our tradition, if part of our lived reality is being liberal in this way, then what the BJP is trying to do is actually radical. It's not conservative. It's the opposite of conservative because they're trying to break down this particular strand of our history. And so this is what they're trying to do, but this is not how they are perceived. Unfortunately, their messaging has been better than anybody else's, and they've managed to kind of appeal to people's tribal instinct and their nationalistic pride in some India which never really existed. And that's brought us to this place. And that is a problem, but I wouldn't necessarily say that conservatism per se is necessarily a bad thing. A lot of our great leaders. If you look at Dadabhai Nauroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Ranade, Agarkar, they were all not Ajit Agarkar, Gopal Ganesh Agarkar. They
Hmm.
were basically liberal in their aims but conservative in their means. So those two are really not a contradiction, you know. Whereas in certain ways, the BJP is radical. They are even radical in the terms of what they are doing to Hinduism. If you look at Hinduism for a moment, not as a religion, but as a body of thought and as this big cultural bucket, then that is also assimilative. That also takes in influences from everywhere. But the BJP is actually radicalizing it by reducing it to this thing that they call Hindutva, which has which has certain specific dogmas and certain specific ways of living and doing things which are actually not part of the older lived reality of what Hinduism is all about. So so in that sense there's a radicalism there, but I can understand why people don't view that. The other aspect about young people not caring about rights is that, yeah, it's partly true, because we all got to get on with our lives. Like, we've all got harmonia to bajao, so bhar mein jaye duniya. But the point is that if you remember during the CAA protest, one of the most inspiring aspects of that was young people throughout the country carrying copies of the preamble, right? Preamble, that's a really big deal for me. And it was not Ambedkar's version of the preamble, it was Indira Gandhi's version. So that is a slight quibble I have. But the point is, you see the political awareness, you see the fight that they're doing. They're all across the country, spread out everywhere. And God knows where that movement would have, continued going had COVID not happened. But the fact is that you can sort of that people can be animated by these things. They have been animated by these things in the past. We have seen it during the freedom movement, you know. And yeah, so I'm in general I'm pessimistic, but I think there are a few sort of shards of hope. But yeah, and as far as there being no liberal party, you are absolutely right, in the sense that every political party in India has basically been left on economics and right on society, left wing and right wing. And those are entirely the wrong things to be. Like, I am exactly the opposite of that, because I value individual freedom. And all our parties have been against individual freedoms in both domains, in the economy and in society, including the communists. So the point is that I don't know where hope is going to come from, but I think in their lived reality, most people don't think like that. Like, when like, if Vandit, if you and I went out for dinner, no, I would not force you that नहीं आपको मेरे साथ यही खाना पड़ेगा, or I would not force you to pay for my meal, right? There would be no coercion. We would respect consent. At a personal level, we would have that respect for each other's individual freedom and dignity and autonomy, and most of all, we would respect consent. uh, and in our personal lives, therefore, I like to say we're all libertarian, because it boils down to consent, basically. But when we abstract that to a higher level, suddenly the state coercion becomes the answer to everything. And I think that's a problem, and that is a disconnect. And I don't know if that disconnect can be bridged, because you're right, there has been no liberal party. Those things don't gain momentum, but maybe in future, who knows.
इसमें ना एक दो पॉइंट है अमित. आई एम लिविंग वन थ्रेड ऑन कंजर्वेटिज्म राइट नाउ, बट एक पॉइंट जो मुझे लगता है कि आई थिंक विच इज अनएक्सप्लोर्ड, एंड आई थिंक हम थोड़ा सा उसको डिसमिस कर देते हैं कि कहीं ना कहीं देयर इज समथिंग अबाउट हिंदुत्व दैट इज रिंगिंग अ बेल इन वॉट एवर द अमाउंट ऑफ यूथ दैट इज सपोर्टिंग देम. कुछ ना कुछ है अबाउट दैट आइडियोलॉजी, और वॉट एवर, लाइक शायद एक बार शायद प्रताप भानु मेहता ने शायद आपके पॉडकास्ट पे कहा था कि द ग्रीवियंसेस ऑफ हिंदुइज्म और हिंदूज during the 80s and 90s, and the anxieties of Hindus during 80s and 90s, especially post Mandal, post Babri, they sort of then they became एक sort of कहीं ना कहीं वो हमारे फादर लोगों की जनरेशन में वो आए थे, and then they sort of translated into BJP and getting momentum and Sangh getting momentum and then they eventually getting power. मुझे वो लगता है कि वो grievances कहीं ना कहीं मेरी जनरेशन तक भी हैं, अभी नेक्स्ट जनरेशन में नहीं दिखते वो मुझे. मतलब माय कजिन हु इज लेट्स से 2021, देयर आर मल्टीपल कजिन्स. अच्छा, अब सैंपल सेट भी मतलब मेरे ही कास्ट और मेरे ही सोशियो इकोनॉमिक लोकेशन का है, बट जस्ट टू गिव एन एग्जांपल, उन लोगों में वो ग्रीवेंसेस नहीं दिखते. बट जो मेरी एज के हैं, जो 28 से 32 साल के हैं, या अराउंड 30 से 34 है, उनमें कहीं ना कहीं वो नैरेटिव्स मुझे दिखते हैं कि अरे वो हमारे साथ ऐसा हुआ था, or you don't know कि how wronged we Hindus have been for so many years and centuries. So उसमें you see these narratives, so something is ringing a bell in them, uh, from a हिंदुत्व point of view, which we seriously need to explore कि ऐसा क्या है कि उनको इतना इस आइडियोलॉजी में एक सोलेस मिल रहा है. और अगर उसका एक थॉट एक्सपेरिमेंट अमित मैं बोलूं आपको करने को, will these people, if there is a party who would give the equal amount of vikas that they like, equal amount of flyovers that they like, equal amount of bullet trains that they like, and equal amount of everything that the BJP is promising them, but it is not promising Hindutva, it is, let's say, hypothetically a secular or a something else party, would they switch side? I doubt actually. What do you think?
I think, yeah, no, that's a very good question, and it's there are many nuances to it. So there is no, I think, one answer that addresses everything. One aspect of it is that I think at a what has happened to Indians, at least of my generation and beyond, perhaps even your generation. I don't know if it goes all the way down to the youngest people, is that we have developed this apathy towards the state, that we take state dysfunction for granted, एंड वी टेक इट फॉर ग्रांटेड कि गवर्नमेंट तो हमारे लिए कुछ करेगी नहीं, कुछ नहीं होने वाला, जो करना है हमें ही करना है, वी गेट बाय समहाउ द वे वी कैन, एंड दे टेक इट एज अ कांस्टेंट एंड दे टेक इट एज अ गिवन, एंड इट इज अ fact that all governments have sucked basically, with really marginal exceptions at different points in time, but otherwise they have all sucked. We have the state has been a ruler and it hasn't served its people. We have been subjects and not citizens, so that's been true through throughout our history. So I think that leads to an apathy where people have this default attitude that first of all, it doesn't matter which party is in charge, हमारा कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. And that's an understandable attitude. And what then arises from there is that who will they support and why? And they support it on the basis of some kind of tribal instinct that they have. And and Modi's clearly touched a nerve there, where he talks about, like you said, the aspirational, the first of the 4 points you mentioned, the aspirational aspect. I think you're spot on there, that he's touched a nerve there, because you know your life is miserable, there's no job, the world is going to hell, but you're not going to blame Modi for that, because you assume the state is dysfunctional. But instead he makes you feel national pride, Times Square pe ye kiya, UNESCO has named our anthem the best anthem, all of that bullshit, right? So you buy all that, it makes you feel good, you're going with that narrative. But the point is that at I don't see why it always has to be that way. And the future is like, my politics ke bare mein, the example I give is that, in 2004, for example, when George W. Bush beat John Kerry, could you have imagined that your next president will be an African American guy whose surname rhymes with Osama, whose middle name is Hussein? Right? You would have been laughed out of the room if you said that. But in 2008, we have Barack Obama. Equally, in 2012, when Obama beats Mitt Romney, if somebody was to say that that joker, that fool, that laughing stock of everybody, Donald Trump, was going to be the next president, you would again have been laughed out of the room. So it happens, and it happens in both directions. In a direction you and I can applaud when it comes to Obama, and in a direction where you and I can go, what the fuck, when it comes to Trump. But the point is that things can change very fast. What was unimaginable yesterday can become the normalized reality tomorrow. And it can go in either direction. It can go in a direction like, if you look at BJP's leaders from Shama Prasad onwards, they've gotten more and more extreme, to small degrees. Like you have from Shama, I mean, I'm talking about the Jansang as part of that whole, the BJP is on a continuum. So from Shama Prasad, you have Atal Bihari, who is a little more strident. Then you have Advani, who is more hardline. Then you have Modi. Next, maybe Adityanath, or God knows what else is down the line, right? So one possible direction is things get more extreme. The other possible direction is something really unusual happens, which you could not possibly have expected. In fact, this happened in Delhi with the way the Aam Aadmi Party suddenly just erased the Congress and erased the BSP and took all those votes and came to power so overwhelmingly. Now, I am not a fan of Kejriwal. I think he's, uh, I don't think he would be any better than Modi if he came to power. Perhaps worse. He's an immoral sociopath as well. But the point is that in terms of political entrepreneurship, what the AAP should be a case study. In the way that they completely disrupted and then became a dominant force in Delhi at that time. Can this happen at a bigger level? Who knows? Who will do it? Who knows? Maybe the party ruling India 15 years later doesn't exist today. You never know. So I think politics is really full of unknown unknowns, and we never know. So all we can do at an individual level is we keep fighting whatever fight we are fighting. You know, You can't, like, I always think of everything I do as playing the long game, right? I'm it's, I would love there to be somewhere in this country a 15-year-old girl who is listening to my podcast and reading my pieces and listening to your podcast as well, and becoming Prime Minister of India in 2050. That is a win. That is a long game. What can people like you and me do? People like you and me can go in and become part of that process of changing the culture from the bottom up, become part of the process of changing the discourse in some small way, in whatever way we can. And yeah, that's all we can do. And the point is, we would be fools if we imagine ki सब कुछ बदल जाएगा overnight. सब कुछ बदल जाएगा overnight, but it won't be because of us. And certainly in my case, I may not live to see that. But you do what you got to do.
Acha, quick question. Did your take on AK changed post the Sekri episode?
No, no, no. Of course not. I mean, I respect Sekri's views and his sentiments, and of course, Kejriwal is a friend of his. But the point is, look, Kejriwal welcomed the removal of 370 in Kashmir. He said it will lead to better times in Kashmir. मैंने screenshot भी लिया था तब उसके tweet के लिए, so that I never forget. So that I never forget. There is a folder where I put these screenshots that, you know, and I'm not going to put it anywhere and make a halla and fuss over it. But this is a fact. This is what he did. So my take on him remains what it was. And my take on him has always been this, right? Though at one point I didn't think he was a sociopath in the way that I think he is now, but I was always skeptical of the guy. So yeah, I mean, and I think deep down inside, abhi Sekri bolega nahi, but I'm sure he knows. उसका पुराना दोस्त so वो नहीं बोलेगा, मतलब सेकरी भी, मतलब वो अच्छा बंदा है.
Hmm.
एक बार उसने दोस्त बुला लिया किसी को, तो मतलब पब्लिकली थोड़ी बोलेगा ऐसे, मतलब तो है. बट
But off the record तो बात हुई होगी नहीं कि या did he?
ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड, यार 4 घंटे जब ऑन द रिकॉर्ड बात होती है ना, तो किसी की एनर्जी नहीं होती कि ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड आप कुछ बात करो. तो ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड हम बीच में ब्रेक लिए थे, तो बेसिकली वी वर बोथ प्रेजिंग आकार पटेल दैट व्हाट एन अमेजिंग गाय ही इज. तो उससे ज्यादा कुछ बात हो नहीं पाई.
Hmm.
तो वही है बस.
एक और small digression and then I will come back to these points you mentioned. Do you see how much of your podcasting impact has you have on me? I am also following a little bit your pattern. I'll just take a digression. I'll just take a digression. So, uh,
I'm thank you. I'm very honored. I'm very honored. I mean, but I mean, I wouldn't say it's because of me. I mean, I think these are practices that you adopt. So you could have got it from me. You could have got it from somewhere else. It doesn't really matter. I think it makes a discourse richer. If there are people like you who will listen, who will take notes, who will follow these different rabbit holes. So yeah. So I'm so happy to be chatting with someone like you.
thank you, Amit. So the digression that I wanted to take, Amit, was कि you have like इतने सारे episodes कर लिए हैं. Do you sort of look at your network sometimes and आपको लगता है कि यार मैं काफी बड़े बड़े लोगों को जानता हूँ यार, मतलब it's like not a joke, मतलब काफी I'm just like I have such a strong network now. And what do you think about your network? आपको क्या लगता है उसके बारे में? uh, it's very rich.
See, on one hand, I'm very fortunate that all these people have agreed to speak to me at different points in time and shared their insights and all that. But I'm like, one thing that I kind of realize at a very visceral level is the impermanence of everything. Like, one of my writing students the other day in a class was talking about how whenever she's had sent a piece and she hits a send button, she feels so nervous. And how do I get past the anxiety? And I said, number one, don't sweat what you can't control, because once it's gone, it's gone. But the other thing is that in the long run, this shit doesn't matter. We're all gonna die. That's it. Life is meaningless. That's what it is. So everybody laughed, of course. But that's kind of my, in a sense, it's my default attitude that don't take yourself too seriously. I have lived enough. I have had my highs. I was at that period where, the biggest blog in the country and all of that. I had that massive following. Then I go away for 5 years. I come back. I'm nobody again, right? Which is great, which is as it should be, which is the nature of the situation. So the point is that I try to just live in the present moment and do whatever work I can with full intensity at that moment. Like, I never listen to past episodes. So all of these people who have come on my show, all of them, every one of them, whether they are famous or they're not famous, I'm grateful that they came, because it's a big deal for me that someone can sit opposite me and speak honestly without a filter, that they have that trust in me, that they will just open themselves up. like Sekri did, and Sekri actually speaks to everyone without a filter. But so many of my guests that they can talk about their childhood. They can even cry in front of me, which has happened in the studio, and we might even tear up together. That's also happened. So I am very blessed that people have trusted me so much, and we can kind of go through that. But yeah, I it's not a source of pride. Nothing is a source of pride. I mean, everything goes, everything ends. I'm aware of that.
Coming back to now, that's very well put, Amit. By the way, coming back to my the the point where I left. So as we speak, आज हम बात कर रहे हैं. I think मोदी जी काशी में है शायद.
अच्छा.
So and he is inaugurating a temple there, which brings me to a very
हम्म,
interesting question, Amit. कि देखो, आप सेक्युलर वर्ड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से हटाओ ना हटाओ, अब तो कंट्री का पीएम अब्रप्ट आउटराइटली जाके मंदिर और ये इनॉग्रेट कर रहा है. सो द do you believe that secularism or Nehru secularism, which is said that the state will be equidistant from all religions, is now gone in the history of dustbin? And why I say this is because maybe there is a regime change, let's say in 2024 2029, the precedents इतना strongly set हो गया है कि अगले वाले पे प्रेशर होगा कि यार अगर मैंने मंदिर नहीं इनॉग्रेट करा तो मैं मतलब मेरे शायद अपर कास्ट वोट और हिंदू वोट चले जाएंगे. सो व्हाट डू यू थिंक अबाउट दिस? आपको लगता है सेकुलरिज्म फॉर नाउ एटलीस्ट इज नेहरू का सेकुलरिज्म इज गॉन? व्हाट इज जनरल टेक?
I think the constitution was secular in its initial avatar. I think Nehru was not.
Hmm.
I think so. For example, when Ambedkar was, in fact, the Ambedkar's version of the preamble doesn't have the word secular and socialist.
Hmm.
They were put in by Indira Gandhi later, and of course, I strongly object to putting the word socialist in there. But okay, but she put in the word secular. Now, the topic of whether the word secular should be in the preamble was brought up in Ambedkar's time, and if I remember correctly, Ambedkar's response was that secularism is written is implicit all over the constitution. You don't need to write it in the preamble, and he was correct in the sense that as originally written, the constitution is quite secular. It does say that every individual has to be treated equally and equality of treatment and all of that. So in those terms, I think there was a secularism there which flowed through the entirety of the constitution. Nehru was not secular, and I think the BJP is correct in its old criticisms that he was pseudo secular, in the sense that secularism means that you treat all religions equally. If you look at the arguments over the Hindu Code Bill, what were the arguments? The Hindus had, there was a personal law for Hindus, there was a personal law for Muslims, and Nehru went and said that, oh, Hinduism is so regressive, so we will have the Hindu Code Bill to create a new code for them, but we will not do it for the Muslims. And the opposition there was a principled one. It was that the constitution says you have to treat us all equally. So either you don't touch any of our personal codes, or you
That's for
have a
all.
uniform code which applies to everybody. Why should you privilege one over the other? So in that sense, but also the BJP's criticism is also hypocritical, because the moment you accuse somebody of being pseudo secular, the implication is that you're objecting to the pseudo part of it, and therefore that you're okay with secular, which also they are not. So they were kind of having their cake and eating it too, if you get what I mean.
Hmm.
Now the thing is, are we secular in our lived reality? I think the answer is yes or no, right? There's that old cliche, whatever you say about India, the opposite is also true. um, I think the answer is yes and no. I think in our lived reality, I think many people don't care so much about religion, and but also it is equally true that these passions exist, these tribal identities exist across many different fault lines, not just religion, and they're there. So have we become more or less secular? I don't know, but I think it's certainly not a good sign. Like, I don't think Nehru would have inaugurated a temple. Did he ever do it? I don't think so. So in
No, I
that
didn't.
sense, I think
Yeah.
it's a step down. Yeah, in that sense, I think it's a step down. I think there should be zero religious posturing done by any political leader. Absolutely zero. Don't inaugurate temples. Whatever you do that concerns religion, do it in your private space. Don't make a public show of it, like the Aam Aadmi Party does, like even the Congress has done time and again. Don't make a public show of it. It has nothing to do with the business of governance or government, and it should not be there in politics, and the fact that it is a problem, and everybody is to blame for that.
Hmm. एंड बट ऑल्सो अब तो वो बहुत हम नहीं है बहुत दूर पार लग चुकी एक तरीके से कि अब तो देयर इज नो टर्निंग बैक इन अ वे ना, क्योंकि कोई भी पार्टी आप ले लो कहीं ना कहीं मतलब दे हैव टू डू दिस नाउ, दे हैव टू प्ले दिस गेम बिकॉज द रूल्स ऑफ द गेम हैज चेंज्ड.
No, you're very right. You're very right. That's very perceptive. And the rules of the game change. Like, for example, what is another hygiene factor today? Another hygiene factor is that in every election, every party that is contesting will have to say कि हम farm loan waivers करेंगे. Right? Now, the question is not whether farm loan waivers are a good or a bad
Hmm.
thing. The point is that it's become a hygiene factor कि सबको बोलना है. It's become a hygiene factor like, that you offer freebies to voters in
Hmm.
return. Like हम pressure cooker देंगे या rice देंगे या जो भी देंगे and all of that. So all those have become hygiene factors, but I think that can also change with time. A mistake that political parties have made in India's past is to take voters for granted. And in a sense that's a good thing, because if Indira Gandhi did not take voters for granted, she would not have called the emergency. She thought she would win, when she called elections in 77. And her son Sanjay said, no, 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 no more elections, ho gaya, we are in charge, no more elections. And Indira thought she would win, and she took the voters for granted, and thank God for that, because then democracy resumed. The Congress has also found out the hard way that, boss, you cannot take the voters for granted. And the BJP will also find out not just that they cannot take the voters for granted on the one hand, but also that they have unleashed a tiger that they cannot control. you know it is one thing, like I often say, that AAP and Congress can't out Hindutva the BJP. You can't play their game and win. But equally, I think even the BJP can't control this demon that they have unleashed. Like, I sometimes go down these right wing rabbit holes on YouTube and all of that, and one of the things and a lot of that content is very disturbing, and one of the things I've realized is that all these people think not only that Modi is letting them down, but that Adityanath is too moderate, and the kind of things they want is next level, right? You're laughing now, you won't laugh 5 years later, bro.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow.
so um, तो ये हालत है. So I'm not sure even they can kind of control this tiger. So I think it's not, yeah. So one, I think these politicians have unleashed a tiger and they're feeding a beast, which is not a good thing. And by feeding a beast, I don't mean that going to a temple is a bad thing. If you're religious in your personal life, that's personal choice. That's cool. Yeah, that's fair income. But to to unleash the passions that religion invokes in the public sphere, in our politics, I think that never ends well.
Hmm. And how much of it would you sort of say कि यार if you want the I mean, would you blame the our political system also in a way कि यार फर्स्ट पास द पोस्ट सिस्टम है, मुझे 30% वोट चाहिए या 35% वोट चाहिए मुझे फर्स्ट आने के लिए. अब अगर मैं भी उसकी जगह होता तो मैं कैसे वोट करूंगा, पूरी कंट्री तो वोट कर रही है अपनी कम्युनिटी के हिसाब से. तो द इजीएस्ट वे फॉर मी इज कि हिंदू मुस्लिम बाइनरी क्रिएट कर लो, 60 70 80% में से अगर मुझे 30 40% में मिल जाते हैं, आई एम डन, आई हैव विक्ट्री. So how much of will you also attribute to the system that we are in?
Uh, I attribute all of it to the system, because the system creates the incentives, but I don't attribute any blame to any individual, because everyone is responding to incentives, including the people who designed the system were responding to rational incentives at the time. Abhi, आपने जैसे बोला first past the post mention किया, and this is a good illustration of how a party can take its position for granted. In my episode with Jayaprakash Narayan, episode 149, he spoke about how they tried to bring about an amendment so there'll be proportional
Yeah,
representation and
I
not first
remember
past the
that.
post. And yeah, and Sonia Gandhi opposed it
Yeah.
because she thought the Congress is chilling, we are in power, why should we dilute some of our power? And see how it worked against her. Had
Yeah.
she accepted, had that amendment gone through, the
Yeah.
BJP would not have been so dominant
Yeah. आज
today.
इनके पास होते
So
सीट्स होती ज्यादा होती.
आज उनके पास ज़्यादा सीट्स होती, और देश का ये हालत नहीं होता, बिकॉज़ यू वुडन्ट हैव दिस हेजेमोनिक डोमिनेंस ऑन आवर पॉलिटिक्स बाय द बीजेपी टुडे. तो वो नहीं हुआ. Another example of how one you can take your position for granted, and through the sort of low level of intellect that some people in politics have, and she's not even a she kind of inherited her dominance in the Congress party. She didn't work her way there. So just extraordinarily stupid thing to do, to not kind of go with it, because it would have helped our entire system. But the other aspect of it is that, where do you blame it? Look, for example, if we talk about the oppressive centralized state, I did an episode with Gyan Prakash on the emergency, where Gyan Prakash pointed out that whatever the emergency was, it wasn't unconstitutional. Now,
Yeah.
why wasn't it unconstitutional? It was because when the framers of the constitution sat in that room in Delhi, the entire country was falling apart around them. We today take for granted that India is the shape we see on the map. They had no idea. Everything could have fallen apart. So your natural urge is to centralize power as much as you can. So can we blame them for that? Not exactly. They were behaving rationally in that moment, you know. But today we see the consequences of that centralization of power, and the way they took over the colonial apparatus of the British and continued to use that to oppress us, many very often in ways worse than what the British did. And it's difficult to give individual blame for this. I don't even think individuals matter. you know and Nehru died, what, 60 years ago almost. Why do we talk about individuals? I mean, we should talk about individuals in power today, of course, but the past is what it is. We need to see how to move ahead. But of course, besides you and me, I don't know if anyone will agree with that.
Hmm. Got it. No, yeah, makes sense यार. और इसमें ऑल्सो देखो, जो सिस्टम तो जो है हमारा वो है ही, एंड मुझे ये लगता है कि नन ऑफ द पार्टीज इवन वांट टू चेंज इट फ्रॉम टॉप टू डाउन. मुझे, क्योंकि मुझे कहीं पे डिस्कशन दिखता भी नहीं है, फॉर वॉट एवर रीजन्स. They do not see even merit, even forget first past the post, even representational democratic system is good. Even in sort of when you're voting, there is some other forms of voting which is preferential voting, where you vote every candidate as 1 2 3 4 5, and then the least preferred candidates get ruled out. कितने सारे ऑप्शंस हैं हमारे पास टू मेक द प्रोसेस मोर डेमोक्रेटिक. बट दीज आर लाइक ह्यूज चेंजेस. आई मीन, अभी तो हम सिर्फ हमारी स्पीचेस और उसकी बात कर रहे हैं कि भाई हमें बोलने की आज़ादी दे दो. तो ये तो मतलब लॉन्ग फॉर्म ऑफ वो होने चाहिए. बट अभी तो कभी आपको मौका लगे ना, तो इस पे जरूर आप एक पॉडकास्ट करना, बिकॉज आई थिंक यू कैन पुल दिस ऑफ. इज दिस वन थॉट दैट वी almost 15 minutes we discuss ki why are young people so, if you find a researcher who can tell us कि भाई क्यों youngsters इनको इतना वोट दे रहे हैं, I think that would be a very very interesting episode for sure. uh, but having said that, tell me, what are your current like what with, I mean, अभी जैसे 2 3 साल बचे हैं जनरल इलेक्शंस में, where do you see things going?
I don't know. I'm a firm believer that, like I keep saying, the future is unknown unknowns. It's very hard to predict anything, and I have been wrong. When demonetization happened, I thought it was the largest assault on private property in human history. यूपी का इलेक्शंस आने वाला था. मैंने सब फ्रेंड्स को कॉन्फिडेंटली प्रेडिक्ट कर दिया कि वो ऐसे हारेंगे, उनकी इतनी पिटाई होगी. यू सी व्हाट
Yeah.
हैपेंड, इट वाज जस्ट द ऑपोजिट. तो आई थिंक थोड़ी वहाँ पे विशफुल थिंकिंग हो गई.
Hmm.
2019 के लिए भी मैंने सोचा था कि मतलब दे कांट मेंटेन इट, क्योंकि वो आउटलायर रिजल्ट था 2014 का, मेंटेन नहीं कर पाएंगे. जो क्लीन स्वीप था इतने सारे स्टेट्स में, और मतलब हंग पार्लियामेंट होगी, कुछ अकाउंटेबिलिटी होगी, देखो क्या हुआ. तो मुझे कुछ प्रेडिक्शन नहीं करना है, बिकॉज आई एम आई हैव द ह्यूमिलिटी टू रिकग्नाइज दैट दिस इज टू मच ऑफ अ कॉम्प्लेक्स कंट्री. मुझे कुछ नहीं पता. मैं बिट बाय बिट थोड़ा बहुत समझने की कोशिश करता हूँ. But I also think that there are so many factors which could change it. There is a whole parliament delimitation exercise. You don't know what could happen there between the north and the south. There is there is also age. Modi is 71. What happens next? Who is jostling for position? Does the RSS want to regain its control over the BJP by putting one of their own men there next? You don't know that either. And yesterday I was having dinner with a friend of mine who famous economist I respect a lot, who told me that there is a probability of one, that at some point in time there will be in North India there will be an earthquake of Richter size 9, because the Indian plate is basically climbing up the Himalayas. Something's got to give. Cracks will form. Shit will happen. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, could die. How would that affect something like our politics? We don't know that as well. There are so many unknown factors. Like COVID randomly आ गया, सब कुछ बदल गया. Politics उतना नहीं बदला, लेकिन बाकी सब कुछ बदल गया सबके लिए. Economy बदल गई, you know. So you don't know what unknowns lie on the road ahead of you, and how they could impact our politics. So I try to not kind of make predictions or get too involved in that sense. But you don't sweat what you cannot control, right? I can't control the short game. I can maybe have an impact in the if I play the long games, which is what I try to do, which will be an unseen impact for me always. But that's what I can control, and that's what I try to do, and it seems that's what you try to do also. We do our podcast, we do the harmonia. For where goes the dunya, what can we do?
Hmm. Uh, yeah, you're right. ये बड़ा interesting है earthquake वाला, and like did quite scary also यार.
No, no, it's and the thing with all of these is, and apparently, like, people in the US have been talking about the San Andreas fault in California for decades, right? And they've been preparing for that. Like, every house that they have built since that point when they made that decision costs 20% more because they're making it earthquake proof. They're doing all of that, but actually, the earthquake that might happen in North India is way worse than the San Andreas fault earthquake, and it'll hit India much harder because of just the poor way in which our cities are constructed, the overcrowding, all of that. So it's and how does something like that change the equation? you know if so we don't know. I mean, that's just one example of a random unknown which can strike you, like, like a black swan event, and you have no idea what can possibly happen, and we should not take anything for granted, honestly. uh, yeah.
Yeah. एक्चुअली कोविड वाली आप बात आपने बोली, ये भी बहुत बड़ा गुत्थी है यार कि कोविड ने हमारा पॉलिटिक्स कैसे इफेक्ट करा कर नहीं करा, मतलब नोबडी नोज. आई मीन आउट फ्रॉम द आउटसाइड इट अपीयर्स कि थिंग्स आर द सेम. एंड मे बी व्हेन यू गो टू, फॉर एग्जांपल मैं अभी अपने मैं आई वाज इन जबलपुर एट माय इन-लॉज, तो वहां पे मैं थोड़ा बहुत आई वाज जस्ट ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड. सो देयर वाज लाइक कि हाँ थोड़ा डिसअपॉइंटमेंट तो है, बट अब किसके अलावा किसको वोट दे, ये द सेम थिंग, लाइक नथिंग हैज वो कि अच्छा फिर क्या करेंगे. तो मतलब एंड आई एम प्रिटी श्योर कि यार 24 के टाइम 23 के इलेक्शन दे आर, ये लोग अभी से प्रिपेयर कर रहे होंगे. मतलब दे वुड हैव थॉट्स कि यार हम ये इलेक्शन ए बी सी डी ये हम कैसे करेंगे जनरल इलेक्शन के टाइम पे. प्रिटी श्योर दे विल कम अप विद सम नैरेटिव, सम सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक, समथिंग, सम गंगो आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स, एंड देन द सेम स्टोरी विल ऑल ओवर अगेन. हैव यू थॉट अबाउट इट? मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि ऐसा कभी आपने सोचा भी कि यार कि इतना बड़ा डैमेज करा कोविड ने सेकेंड वेव में, लाइक एवरीबडी लॉस्ट समवन near dear, still it didn't affected our politics, at least from the surface.
Yeah, yeah. So, first of all, what the effect of COVID will be is very hard to kind of pin down even after it happens, because we won't be able to disentangle what happens from other factors that could have caused it and so on and so forth. My sense of COVID, though, was, especially when the second wave happened, was that this affected more lives than even the trauma of partition did, because partition was in certain areas, Punjab, Bengal, and so on. But COVID affected every family in the country, in the sense that everybody knew someone or the other who had gone through it and had experienced loss and all of that. I mean, I certainly did, in a massive way, across, across friends, family, whatever. So everybody had been through that. So now the critical question is, how much of it do you kind of blame on the government, and how much do you say ki ha whatever, I mean, natural calamity and blah blah blah. How much do you sort of go in denial? So all these become imponderable, so we don't know how that will play out. The other aspect is, like, the Shivam Shankar Singh was on my podcast a few episodes ago, and he had been a part of the BJP at the time when around 2017 he left, and the reason he left was he had joined them because he was enthused by their development agenda, and then he realized no development is happening, obviously. And then he was told that for 2019 we won't talk about development, we'll talk about Hindu Muslim, because development, if you fight one election on development, then if you fight the next election on the same issue, you have to show result. Abhi result to hai nahi, right? So you change the issue to Hindu Muslim. Now, what I think, the 2024 elections, what will become a factor is now national defense. So it is quite possible that some random thing or the other will happen, another Balakot, another whatever, and they'll try to spin a narrative out of that. I don't even really know where that goes. And also, I don't know how long you can actually how well you can actually spin a narrative that drowns reality. You can do it to some extent, but you can't do it to a greater extent. Like another imponderable, we spoke about earthquakes and this and that. Another imponderable is China. Like, what are they doing? They built a village in Arunachal Pradesh. They are coming into different. They're becoming randomly aggressive in a way they haven't been for decades. What is their intention? What's happening with that? How does Modi finesse that? How does he work that into his narrative? ठीक है, he showed how macho he is by banning TikTok, but उसके बाद क्या? And really, it's a problem that no government would be able to solve. It's a very difficult problem. You have a neighbor which is much bigger than you, which can kick your ass militarily, and they are being aggressive. What do you do? How do you deal with it? And so how does he deal with that? We don't know. That's another imponderable. God knows what is happening there. So I don't know, but the point is that if you're looking at which political party has the best narrative machinery, that is obviously the BJP. And the 2014 elections would be interesting to watch for that reason. The other thing to note is, if you look at the early 90s, what are the three big things happening there? There are the three M's: Mandal, Mandir, Market, right? And Mandir completely took over. It made markets irrelevant, and it completely subsumed Mandal. I mean, the great achievement of the BJP from a political point of view was what Amit Shah masterminded in 2014, where he made caste dynamics irrelevant and built this broader Hindu vote, where he realized that even if Dalits in UP are voting for Mayawati, it's only the Jatavs who are the privileged among the Dalits who are getting a lion's share of the spoils. So the way he went after non-Jatav Dalits, the way he went after non-Yadav OBCs, uh, you know, the way he went after non-Maratha OBCs in Maharashtra, all of that, it was masterful that they managed to completely make Mandal relatively irrelevant and make Mandir everything, consolidate the Hindu vote. That was masterful. It was also masterful in the sense that economic development, or the market, the third M, was no longer so much of a big factor. And there, of course, our economy's been going downhill since 2011. It's something that began with UPA 2 and is something that is continuing today, but they've appeared to have made it irrelevant because people don't seem to care about economic development anymore. It's all of these other things. So yeah, it's really complicated. It's fascinating times for you and I, right? Just to watch and see कि क्या drama हो रहा है.
हाँ मतलब जस्ट लाइक एज यू नो वो क्लीशे है ना, जस्ट ड्राफ्टिंग हिस्ट्री एज पॉडकास्टर्स, इफ जर्नलिस्ट आर द फर्स्ट ड्राफ्ट ऑफ हिस्ट्री, हम कुछ थर्ड फोर्थ फिफ्थ ड्राफ्ट हो सकते हैं जो कि थोड़ा और बेटर होगा.
हम तो ड्राफ्ट ही नहीं है, हम फर्स्ट ड्राफ्ट को लेके उस पर चर्चा कर
हाँ
रहे हैं.
वही.
तो हमारा तो कुछ है ही नहीं. Yeah.
एंड अमित, सिंस यू हैव इंटरेक्टेड, आपने भी बीजेपी में भी जिनसे अपना इंटरेक्ट करा, सो हाउ डू यू सी द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन, solely basis योर इंटरेक्शन, आई एम आस्किंग, बिटवीन आरएसएस बीजेपी के बीच में आप रिलेशनशिप क्या देखते हो, और उनके इंसेंटिव्स आप कैसे देखते हो? बीजेपी का तो क्लियर इंसेंटिव है, इलेक्शन जीतना है और वॉट एवर इट हेल्प्स. हाउ डू यू सी द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द टू?
I don't know. I don't actually speak to people within the party. Like Shivam has written a couple of books and he is now vociferously anti BJP, but he used to be in the BJP, so we had an interesting conversation. So I don't have any inside story to tell. But one thing that I often ask people who are experts in the BJP, like Prashant Jha was on my show, he wrote that great book, How the BJP Wins. One thing that I often wonder about is that at some level there is a contradiction that on the one hand, everyone can agree that the only party which stands for any particular kind of values consistently is the BJP. We don't agree with those values, but that's what they stand for, which is the whole Hindutva thing. But at the same time, any party becomes successful with a will to power, and that will to power will make any compromise to get power. So, for example, the BJP will campaign in the Northeast and say, "Oh, आप लोग beef खाओ, कोई problem नहीं है." Or the BJP will abuse a politician on the opposition side one day, but the next day they'll buy over that
करेक्ट.
politician and fear everything is okay, he's a good guy. So there it's a will to power and principles don't matter. So now is there a conflict between this, that on the one hand you have a certain party ideology, and on the other hand you have the will to power where you want to win no matter what? And my sense is that will to power goes to a certain point and not beyond that. That will to power will that basic hindutvaness they will never quite lose. Now what the RSS feels about this, I have absolutely no idea, but I think it would be a mistake to assume that the RSS necessarily wants what the BJP wants, or that the RSS necessarily sees the BJP as their only representative in the game. I don't think the RSS, like the whole ethic of the RSS is that the individual doesn't matter. It's the overall sung and all of that, which is a big deal, and they like to stay in the background. And the fact of the matter is that their foot soldiers did a lot of work on the ground, which helped them in 2014 and 2019. But equally, the bigger force perhaps driving their political this thing is a personality cult of Modi. And again, I think there's a contradiction here between the RSS ethos of the Sangh and all of that, and this personality cult of Modi, which seems like a different force. So I can only speculate on this. I mean, अगर आपको कुछ inside information है तो please बताइए,
यार
because
अमित, मैं बोलूंगा कि प्लीज गेट भवर मेघवंशी ऑन योर पॉडकास्ट. एंड
okay.
ही हैज रिटन दिस फैंटास्टिक बुक, आई कुड नॉट बी अ हिंदू. एंड
Hmm.
उनको आई हैव डन अ पॉडकास्ट विद हिम. 3 घंटे का हमारा पूरी 3 साढ़े 3 घंटे की चर्चा हुई थी. ही विल ब्रेक डाउन आरएसएस पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट फॉर यू. He was in the RSS when
Wow.
Mandir was happening, and then he left
Hmm.
RSS, and then because he was a Dalit, he faced discrimination, and then he has his own journey of not having मतलब वो पूरा एंटी RSS और वो पूरी जर्नी है. तो वो आपको, आप
Hmm.
वो वाला मेरा एपिसोड भी आप सुन लेना, बट उसमें आपको बहुत अच्छे
Definitely.
से समझ आएगा. एंड वो मेरे एपिसोड में बोलते हैं, वो मेरे एपिसोड में बोलते हैं कि जिस दिन संघ चाहे वो मोदी में जिसमें से हवा निकाल के किसी और में हवा डाल सकते हैं. दैट इज हिज स्टेटमेंट, एंड ही सेज दैट यू रिमेंबर व्हाट हैपेंड टू अडवाणी. बाय द टाइम ही वाज बैक फ्रॉम पाकिस्तान, ही वाज नो मोर. So his point of view is, and I think I also agree, subscribe to that, is that it is the RSS that calls certain shots. I mean, they have given them the power to govern and make policy measures, बट अल्टीमेटली शायद बाहरी दिखाने के लिए ऐसा दिखा के रखा है कि मोदी और ये वो मतलब बराबर है एंड मोदी जी हैज हम वो हो. बट आई थिंक बाय द एंड ऑफ द डे इट इज द संघ, एंड दैट इज अ वेरी बिग प्रॉब्लम दैट आई ऑल्सो हैव विद द ऑपोजिशन. कि आइदर दे आर कंप्लीटली ब्लाइंड टुवर्ड्स इट, या तो वो उसको देखना नहीं चाहते हैं, या उनके पास कोई स्ट्रैटेजी नहीं है उसको काउंटर करने की, या आरएसएस का गेम इतना शार्प है कि दे डोंट इवन कम आउट एज अ थ्रेट समटाइम्स. लोगों को लगता है कि हम तो थ्रेट ही नहीं यार, हम तो सोशल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, हम कोई थ्रेट थोड़ी है, हम तो बस हमारा थोड़ा हिंदुत्व करते रहते साइड बाय साइड. सो इफ यू आस्क लोगों को बोलोगे क्या संघ थ्रेट है, पीपल विल से नहीं, संघ नहीं थ्रेट है, शायद बजरंग दल थ्रेट है, क्योंकि वो मारपीट करते हुए दिखते हैं. एंड भंवर जी सेज दिस इन द पॉडकास्ट, बोले ये सब एक, सब कुछ एक है, ये एक मुखौटा है. उनको जब बंदूक से बात करनी रहती, लाठी से बात करनी रहती, तब वो बजरंग दल को आगे कर देंगे. जब उन्हें प्यार से बात करनी रहती है तो वो कोई और को, सेवा भारती को आगे कर देंगे, और जब उन्हें इलेक्शन जीतना है तो वो बीजेपी को आगे कर देंगे. बट दिस इज ऑल पार्ट ऑफ द सेम गेम, एंड आई थिंक दैट इज ऑल्सो, इफ आई मीन इफ यू कुड एक्सप्लोर दैट विल बी, यू विल ऑल्सो एंजॉय दैट.
Fascinating. Nani, thank you for the recommendation. I'm going to look for his book right away, and I'm going to listen to your episode. So,
हाँ.
so yeah, this is one way in which you're also doing a public service, right? Because I must say with great shame, I had never heard of the gentleman till just now when you took his name. So you've introduced me to obviously someone I should read.
या डेफिनेटली. और उसमें देखो अमित, एक और ये बात ये है कि मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि शायद दलित रिप्रेजेंटेशन सीन एंड अनसीन में इतना ज्यादा शायद रहा नहीं है. आई डोंट हैव द नंबर्स, तो मैं पूरा कमेंट नहीं करूंगा, बट बिकॉज आई एम ऑल्सो एन एविड फॉलोअर ऑफ योर शो, क्योंकि मुझे नहीं पता, बिकॉज आई एम अवेयर ऑफ ग्रेट दलित एक्टिविस्ट एंड इंटेलेक्चुअल्स, एंड आई नो दैट दे हैव नॉट मेड इट टू सीन एंड अनसीन. तो मुझे लगता है कि मे बी जैसे आपने बताया था एक पॉइंट पे कि यू once in a while you want to have women economists on the show, so I think वो पर्सपेक्टिव लाना हमारे लिए, आपके और मेरे लिए बहुत जरूरी है, as people who has built this stage. क्योंकि क्या है, ये स्टोरीज जब तक मेन स्ट्रीम में नहीं आती है ना, तब तक, एंड सी द टॉपिक, दिस इज भंवर जी का टॉपिक, देखते हैं कितना सही टॉपिक है, अ दलित इन आरएसएस. For a longest time you have made this statement at seen and the unseen that Dalits are voting for the BJP and the tide is shifting. Imagine having this have this conversation with him, what nuance will you get? But some,
I will.
हाँ,
I'm sure I'll get a lot of nuance, but that also doesn't change the fact that
it does,
today
it
the
does,
political party of choice
हाँ,
for the Dalits is the
I it
BJP.
does, it does, I agree to that, but at the same time what I'm trying to tell you is कि थोड़ा सा रिप्रेजेंटेशन शायद हमें वहां पे बेटर करना पड़ेगा. मुझे ऐसा लगता है थोड़ा सा, you should think about it. That is one humble feedback of a
No, no,
listener.
no, no. Thank you for the feedback, and that's what I always try to do: make it more diverse, get more women on, so on and so forth. But and there are people I have in mind whom I will invite at some point. But one of the things I don't want to do is, invite sort of activists who might be out of touch with what the Dalit mainstream is all about. So I'd rather speak to someone like a Chandrabhan Prasad or someone like that, who I think gets that pulse. I don't want someone who is just going to come and say that, oh, the BJP is a casteist party and blah blah blah, because you need to explain away then why is it that the Dalits have chosen the BJP over all other parties.
Of course.
Why is it that the Dalits have voted more for the BJP in 2014 and 2019 than for all other parties? Like, what I find is many elites on Twitter and so on and social media, mostly Savarna elites, mind you, are completely out of touch with the reality of this country. And I am more interested in that reality. And you're right that I should then reach out and try to get more voices from there. The other thing about my podcast is that, and this is a confession of my own limitation, that I think of my podcast as, I don't make a list of these are the things I should do in a normative sense. I simply follow my own curiosity and my own intellectual journey. And in that sense, I'm just being authentic to myself. Now, that will obviously be a restriction in the sense that if I am not interested in a particular subject, I may not do an episode on it, right? And it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I have to be authentic to myself to do what I do. And at the end of the day, there are also people like you who are inviting all of these people and doing a public service to people like me by introducing them to me. So there is space for all of us. Like, one of the things that kind of gets to me is when you'll point to someone who's doing something good and they'll say, but ye bhi karna chahiye tha. Like Veer Das, when he gave his to India speech, there was criticism that why did he not mention Dalits? The point is, if you're going to criticize what somebody left out, nobody's ever going to put everything in. You criticize the good that praise the good that people do, and a bunch of different people will do good in a bunch of different ways, and all of it will come together in an important way. So that's kind of how I sort of look at that.
Hmm. No, I understand, and completely appreciate you, being candid here. But उसमें अमित, बस उसमें मेरा बस ये एक ही point है कि मुझे ये लगता है, forget about, and I understand you. I mean, you will not just invite any other activist. Nobody would want to. But मुझे लगता है कि अगर हम उस डिस्कोर्स के साथ, जिसको ट्रेडिशनली रिप्रेजेंटेशन नहीं मिला है, अगर हम उसके साथ रिलेटिवली ज्यादा एंगेज करेंगे ना, you will find the best of the best there, because there is best of the best. The And you will find amazing people like Chandrapant Prasad, and even fantastic economists as well, and fantastic intellectuals as well. हमारा प्रॉब्लम ये हो जाता है ना अमित, कभी कभार हम कॉन्शियसली एंगेज नहीं करते हैं. हमको लगता है कि यार मेरी भी क्यूरियोसिटी, सो द वे आई एम नॉट सेइंग दैट यू शुड आल्सो ऑपरेट द वे आई ऑपरेट, आई एम नॉट सेइंग दैट एट ऑल, माइंड यू. आई एम जस्ट सेइंग इट समटाइम्स इफ वी कॉन्शियसली ट्राई टू एंगेज कि यार मैं ना, I let's a resolution, 2-3 episode, let's just have somebody from a marginalized section, and you will see कि यार वहाँ पे इतना ज्यादा वो है that you will like यार मैं तो करा ही नहीं अभी तक. And that is how I changed. मतलब मेरे उसमें भी first 20-24 episodes तक कोई representation नहीं, but then somebody came on record and on record said this to me, and then it is when it hit me, and then it's what changed. So I always try to, and I know Amit, you are somebody who would take feedbacks very openly. So I thought कि ये feedback मेरे भी कुछ listeners का था for you, to be honest. कि when you're speaking with Amit, do pass on this feedback that they see that seen and unseen can create that space for people from marginalized section, but वो शायद उन्हें दिखा नहीं, so वो बहुत बार disappointed होते हैं, तो obviously they can't reach you directly. Twitter पे कैसे reach करेंगे? तो बस that's what
No,
I
no,
wanted
that's
to.
no. I appreciate the feedback, and I'm always trying to expand my intellectual boundaries. So of course, I appreciate the feedback, and I'll think about it. But at the same time, it's you're also restricted by the things that interest you, and at some level by the things that you sympathize with as well. Like, I think a lot of politics that comes out of the far left today is as odious to me as politics that comes out of the far right, because they're based on the same thing. They're based on identity, immutable identities, building a sense of victimhood, and focusing on grievances of the past. And I have an issue with both of those. And people from the far right also say that, hey, why don't you have so and so Hindutva activist on your show and all of that. So there are lines that I have drawn, and the point is that this is not a taxpayer funded show. Ultimately, I've got to be true to myself and do what I have to do. And I think, but I make an honest effort to engage and to expand my boundaries. But if I don't do that, you do that, and
Yeah.
yeah. So
I will.
more power to all of us. Let a thousand flowers bloom. If somebody is not happy with the approach that I take, they should start their podcast. This is a time where creators can actually start their podcasts. They do not need gatekeepers. They do not need platforms. You can just do it. It's low cost. You can do it the way you did, Vandit. For example, you were telling me about this, and that was very inspiring. What you said, that during the CAA protest, you said, you pointed out that there are two different impetuses that drove you to start this, right? And you were saying that one, samajna tha, that you wanted to understand what is happening around us a little better, and you could do that through conversations with people. And two, badalna tha, that you wanted to bring about some change in your small way. So those are great impetuses, and you started, and it's doing so well. And I think this is episode 49 you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah.
So nobody's starting anybody from doing their own thing.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And very soon it will have 50 episodes as well. So, Amit, yeah, this coming back to now the podcasting, but we have discussed so much of politics. And tell me this, that how are you also visualizing some point in time ki yaar, this is how seen and unseen will be like few years down the line? Do you also want to get into like a YouTube Joe Roganish format, where you are like sitting in a studio recording with people out there in full video? Yeah, what is your visualization of seen and the unseen few years down the line?
Yeah, a few years to बहुत लंबा है यार. Like, if tomorrow a truck could run me over. So, by the time you release the episode, I was honored to have the late Amit Varma on my show. No, but seriously. So I don't want to think too far down the line, but I just, right now, I think I'm very satisfied with the work that I do. I think I have conversations which are really rewarding for me, which are rewarding for my listeners. I'm constantly getting that kind of feedback and that kind of engagement, and I'm just going to continue going down that road for now. I do want to go on YouTube and try a lot of new things, but none of them is like a video version of this format. I don't really think I want to do that right now. That is also logistically extremely difficult to do. For one person to kind of manage, and I just want to be a one person band doing whatever I can. But I want to throw different things at the YouTube wall, see what emerges, and all of that. I mean, even I arrived at this format of the seen and the unseen after throwing things at the wall. And in the early episodes it looked completely different from what it does today. So therefore, it's I know that any journey that I make in any medium, that any creator makes in any medium, will sort of follow that path.
Mm.
So I don't know where it will go. I don't know what I'll be doing 5 years from now if I'm around. Hopefully I feel a lot of satisfaction for the work that I do in the seen and the unseen. It's really been a labor of love for me. So I want to continue that. But apart from that, कुछ ज़्यादा मतलब सोचा नहीं है in specific terms कौन से direction में जाएगा. जहाँ जाएगा जाएगा. Maybe 12-hour episodes.
Oh, sorry, maybe
12-hour
maybe 12-hour
episodes.
episodes. Oh, wow.
No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But one of the ways in which it has evolved is it's got longer and longer. But I think this is about, I mean, abhi theek hai, but who knows what I'll think next year. So, yeah.
And like typically, just trying to get into how you operate as a podcaster, Amit. How many recordings do you do like in a month? Like, do you have some targets, or typically how many recordings you are done in a month?
See, the show is weekly, so the average is 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But what I used to do pre-COVID is I would go to a city. Like in Jan 2020, I went to Bangalore, spent I think 5 days. I recorded 7 episodes or something, and the show was shorter than 2 hours each, so it wasn't like the 4-hour marathons I have now. Then I went to Delhi. In 10 days, I recorded 7-8 episodes, or actually in 2 weeks I recorded 10 episodes. So even after COVID happened, I had a long bank which ran out. Now during COVID, I was forced to record remotely, and so I went with the flow and I did that. But what happened there was that I got really slow, and it was hard to kind of break out of my lethargy, get motivated, and you go through low phases. So I was on kind of just week by week chal raha tha, and recently I've started traveling again. I went to Delhi last month. I did 5 episodes in 5 days. Last week I recorded a couple of episodes in Bombay. I'm going again to Delhi tomorrow. We are speaking on, what is the date today? 13 December. So 14th, I'm going there, and I have recordings on 16th and 17th, because since I'm in Delhi, why not? And February or late Jan, I'll go to Bangalore again and do a bunch of episodes. So that's how I sort of like to work, except that the episode length has now gone up, and therefore the amount of work required is much more. So I can't like do 2 episodes a day ever again. That is simply not possible. It's can't have the energy for that. So yeah, so I try, but I'm going to try to do bunches in advance wherever I can, and give myself the space to do other work in between. And also, I think in-person episodes have, one, they have a charm of their own. You can, it's easier to make the other person comfortable and relax and all of that. And also, it's easier to control sound quality if you're recording in a studio. Like, I have a home studio in Bombay, but when I go to Delhi and Bangalore, I can record at studios, and those are and that's much better quality. Remote में क्या problem होता है कि, see, अभी you're a professional, I'm a professional, we both have mics, but otherwise not everybody has a mic. कुछ लोग कंप्यूटर के स्पीकर से बात कर रहे हैं, या वो ईयर सेट में जो होता है उससे बात कर रहे हैं, तो that does matter, उसकी क्वालिटी भी थोड़ी डाउन जाती है. So all those factors come into play.
And how much in advance do you, because like you plan your recordings, and is there somebody to help you out in sending email to guest, ensuring everybody is there on time, blocking their calendars?
नहीं, 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 मैं सब खुद ही करता हूँ. Like, I have an editor who edits my shows, but there also it's mainly just treating the sound, running filters, making sure that's okay, because there's not really much editing per se that happens, because I like to keep the organic conversation. So if I talk to a guest for 3 hours, वो तीनों घंटे आएँगे. बीच में अगर कुछ रिपीट कर दिया या बोला कि अमित 1 सेकंड ये फिगर चेक करने दो, वो काट देंगे. But otherwise the conversation is what it is. That is my ethic. That's how I like it to be, कि जैसे organic हुआ था वैसे ही हो. And there's and I have an artist who helps me with the cover image every week, but besides that I have no one who helps me. In fact, people keep asking, can we be interns on your show, can we help you, and all that. And my point is that would actually get in the way, because when I am doing all of my research, I need to sort of, while I am reading it, other thoughts are coming, questions are coming, I might want to write them down, I might want to take notes of specific things, and that is not a process anyone else can do it for me. So for my own understanding, I have to necessarily do all the research myself. And yeah, there's no one to help me with the logistics. I kind of do it myself, because I'm just kind of comfortable right now that way. I understand that people say that, hey, if you want to scale, if you want to do this, do that, you have to build a team, all of that. Maybe when I'm doing YouTube, if something takes off and all of that, I'll consider that. But otherwise, as far as possible, I just like to be like a one-man show.
And why did you move the senior and something to Monday? I was just curious.
I think different reasons. I got different feedback from different people and all of that. But one reason was actually, it was a logistical like, first of all, when I was with IVM, they were my partners for the first 2 years of the journey, and their research showed that Monday was the best day. तो पहले Monday को आता था. उसके बाद when I went independent from them, and I own the entire show now. I took it to Sunday, because my logic was that Sunday सुबह आया तो people have the whole holiday to listen to and all of that. And then there was feedback कि Monday को ही ठीक था. But then the real, actually, not the real reason, there are multiple reasons, but one big factor was a logistical factor, that I had started this writing course, और उसके webinar Saturday में होते थे. तो Saturday I would get extremely tired doing those webinars, and then I would have to do the show notes for my episode which was coming out. And always edits के साथ क्या होता है, मतलब late आते हैं, they come the day before, then you sit, you have to listen to the full thing to make sure everything is okay, then you do your show notes. Like my current episode with Sarah Rai, which is up, I think has 53 show notes. So, and more links than that actually. So you have to, a lot of work goes into that. And I basically found what was happening was, I would do webinars all Saturday, and those days I had 3 webinars in my writing course. So तीन webinars थे Saturday को. Then I'm basically staying up all night, and somehow I'm uploading it on Sunday morning, and then I'm just crashing, and I thought my body can't take this anymore. So let me shift it to Monday. Sunday को आराम से जो show notes करने हैं वो सब करना है, वो कर सकते हैं.
No, actually, I mean, when you are saying this, तो मुझे लगता था मैं ही पागल हूँ. But ऐसा लग रहा है कि आपके साथ भी ऐसे ही होता है, because I have also faced. I mean, you have a webinar, but मेरा जॉब रहता है फ्राइडे तक. तो मेरा
Correct, correct.
प्रोक्रेस्टिनेट होते होते एडिट करूंगा रात में, होते होते ये होता है कि मैं सैटरडे एडिट करता हूँ, एंड देन फाइनली आई
Hmm.
रिलीज इट ऑन लाइक संडे मॉर्निंग, एंड देन आई एम लाइक डन.
तो
आप अपनी प्रोसेस बताओ ना, आप अकेले करते हो क्या? आप लाइक व्हाट डू यू यूज टू एडिट, कैसा प्रोसेस
यार
है?
माय प्रोसेस इज लाइक आई रिकॉर्ड, जैसे अभी हमने आज स्क्वाडकास्ट पे करा है, ज़ेनकास्टर पे करा, तो उस पे मैं रिकॉर्ड करता हूँ एंड
हम्म
मेरा वो है कि मेरा आई द फर्स्ट वेव वाज द टाइम व्हेन आई वाज लाइक कि बॉस हर हफ्ते एक एपिसोड करूंगा। वो मैंने कुछ
हम्म
करा भी बट वो पॉसिबल नहीं हुआ एंड बाद में रियलाइज हुआ कि महीने का 2 एपिसोड इज लाइक मोर देन इनफ फॉर मी, मैं उससे ज़्यादा कर नहीं पाऊंगा विद माय जॉब एंड देन उसमें भी इस साल महीने के 2 के हिसाब से 24 होने चाहिए थे, 24 तो नहीं होंगे, 20-21 टाइप हो जाएँगे। आफ्टर योर एपिसोड एंड वन मोर एपिसोड तो 20-21 एपिसोड हो जाएँगे। सो व्हाट आई डू इज़ आई कीप अ टैब ऑन 3-4 पीपल दैट आई वांट टू इनवाइट एंड लाइक यू आई आल्सो गो इन माय होल इंटेलेक्चुअल जर्नी कि यार मुझे क्या जानना है, मुझे कौन-सा टॉपिक जानना है
हम्म
और मैं तो वो देखता हूँ।
हम्म
तो इफ आई हैव टू गो लाइक सिर्फ कास्ट कास्ट की लाइंस पे ही शायद 10-15 एपिसोड तो हो गए होंगे इजीली, बिकॉज वो इतना डीप था कि उसमें जितना डीप गए इट्स क्रेजी, इट यू कैन स्टिल डू मोर एपिसोड्स। तो वहां पे देन आई हैव लाइक फ्यू पीपल हियर कि यार इनको इनवाइट करना है, उनको ट्विटर पे मैसेज करा या ईमेल भेजा मेरा, बिकॉज आई एम फ्रॉम सेल्स एंड बिजनेस डेवलपमेंट बैकग्राउंड, तो ईमेल भेजना मुझे बहुत अच्छे से आता है। सो वो मैं भेज देता हूँ। देन आई टिपिकली रिकॉर्ड ऑन अ सैटरडे एंड विद इन द नेक्स्ट उसके अगले हफ्ते या उसके एक आधी अगले हफ्ते डिपेंडिंग ऑन माय प्रोक्रेस्टिनेशन मैं सैटरडे रिकॉर्ड करके संडे लॉन्च करता हूँ एंड दैट्स व्हाट आई डू। आई एडिट इट ऑन ऑडेसिटी, ज़ेनकास्टर पे या एंकर पे
हम्म
रिकॉर्ड करता हूँ। शो नोट्स भी आई मेक इट माई सेल्फ। माई शो नोट्स आर लिटिल बिट डिफरेंट देन योर्स, माई शो नोट्स ऑल्सो हैज टाइम स्टैम्प्स। सो तो
अच्छा
वो मतलब थोड़ा सा वो एफर्ट एक लेवल ज़्यादा हो जाता है वहाँ पे। वो टाइम स्टैम्प का भी फीडबैक लिसनर से ही आया था।
हम्म
तो दैट्स व्हाट माय प्रोसेस इज, इट्स वेरी सिमिलर टू योर्स।
Good, good. No, I mean it's obviously a labor of love for you also, and I think this is why people warm to podcasts because they recognize कि मतलब ये like what you are doing is basically it's like a junoon. Yeah, you don't have to do this. You're not going to make any monetary reward from it, but it's a satisfaction. Ki like I remember a day when. I was feeling very low at one point in time, a long time ago, and the show was not making any money. 150 एपिसोड हो गए थे, कुछ भी पैसे नहीं आ रहे थे. I was like, why am I doing this? Is it worth it? And then I had a great conversation with a guest. And after the
या
conversation, I was like, fuck, what a conversation. I was floating on air. I thought it's worth it for this.
या
It's worth it for this.
और
Or kuch
कुछ
ho
होना
na
हो।
ho. That you can have a conversation like this. And not just that you have the joy of having the conversation, but then you experience the appreciation of others when they feel the same joy at listening to you.
हम्म।
And that is sort of special to me.
थोड़ा सा ये बताओ ना आप, मतलब विदाउट गेटिंग इनटू स्पेसिफिक्स एंड आई एम श्योर पीपल आर आल्सो क्यूरियस
Hmm.
कि बिजनेस मॉडल कितना पैसा किस स्टेज पे मिलता है, कब मिलता है, कैसे बना सकते हो। डोंट वांट टू गेट इनटू डिटेल्स ऑफ कोर्स, एंड व्हाई डिड आईवीएम डिडंट वर्क आउट
Yeah.
आफ्टर 2 इयर्स, दैट्स आल्सो समथिंग आई वांटेड टू नो।
या आई मीन इट डिडंट वर्क आउट बिकॉज मतलब कि ऐसे नहीं है कि किसी की गलती थी. इट जस्ट समटाइम्स यू जस्ट ड्रिफ्ट different ways and it's not meant to happen, so it's just that. I mean they're very good guys. I wish them all the best. They've been pioneers in podcasting, and obviously if they didn't partner with me, I don't think I would have done the show alone. So वैसा कुछ नहीं है. It's just that कभी कभी बिछड़ना होता है, तो it's okay. um, and now as far as a model is concerned, see, typically now this is an interesting way to think about the creator economy, that कैसे बदला है. Now in the 1990s, for example, if you're a creator, let's say you are a writer, okay, now the problem is that the means of production are not in your hand. If you want to get published, आप टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया भेज रहे हो या किताब लिख रहे हो तो पेंगुइन भेज रहे हो आप. You have these platforms, you are sending it to them. They have gatekeepers who will think in conventional ways, and they will want a conventional kind of content. Also, as a creator, you don't have a direct way to communicate with your audience, so you have no idea what your audience is or what they think. And number four, you have no way of capturing any of the value the audience places on you, in the sense that everybody who reads you or everybody who listens to you one day is actually spending money, because time is money. They value you. Ideally you should be able to capture some of that, and they would willingly give you, right? But there is no mechanism for that. Now in the 90s, a mechanism was you give it to an intermediary, like a big publishing house. They will accumulate eyeballs. They will sell those eyeballs for advertising, and the creator gets a tiny chunk of that. Now that world has changed completely, in the sense that today the tools of production are in our hands. आपने सोचा लास्ट ईयर मैं पॉडकास्ट करूंगा, आपने शुरू कर लिया. देयर इज नो बैरियर देयर. एनीबडी कैन स्टार्ट अ पॉडकास्ट. आपके पास तो वैसे भी माइक है, अच्छा सा ऑरेंज हेडफोन है, लेकिन आप मतलब फोन लेके भी कर
हाँ.
सकते थे अगर आप चाहते हो. जैसे इतने टिकटॉक क्रिएटर्स ने क्या कमाल किया है. सो दैट्स नंबर वन, द मीन्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. नंबर टू इज कोई गेट कीपर नहीं है. लाइक पुराने ज़माने में अगर मैं किसी के पास जाता और बोलता कि मैं एक शो करूंगा जिसमें मैं 4-5 घंटे बात करूंगा ऐसे लोगों के साथ जिनका नाम किसी ने सुना नहीं है, विच इज़ मोस्ट ऑफ माई गेस, तो नो गेट कीपर वुड अलाउ मी इन, राइट? दे वुड लाफ मी आउट ऑफ द रूम. But today, I don't have to care who is giving me permission to do what. I don't need permission. Nobody needs permission. जो करना है हम करेंगे, खुद करेंगे. Then there is the interaction with the audience has gone up, where through various social media and whatever, you can interact with the audience, and creators on YouTube, etc., will also have Discord groups where they are forming communities of their audience, and so on and so forth. But the fourth most important way is that you are able to capture some of the value that people feel for you. Like, especially if you're a high engagement show like a podcast, there is no doubt that there are many people who value you, but there is no way of their expressing how much they value you in monetary terms. And that has changed today. And that really, that's changed in a couple of ways. Number one, in April last year, I opened up this thing. I didn't want to become a subscription website. I want everyone to listen to this because I really like the work I do, and I want everyone to listen to it. So I instead set up this voluntary payment thing, that if you want to support the show because I'm independent, please do. And there I was amazed at the amount of love and support that I got from listeners, which has really kept me independent throughout this time. And obviously, I'm an outlier in the sense I'm one of the early people in India to um, um benefit from that. But it was way more than I expected. People were doing a lot more than buying me a coffee. So really, this show has been kept alive by listeners, actually paying for it to be alive. And after a point, I didn't even advertise this. इसका आप कहीं पे सुनोगे नहीं. I don't put up a link of this. वो मेरे हर एपिसोड के एंड में 10 सेकंड का ये होता है, उससे वो URL पे जाके वो करते हैं. Number one. Number two, what I did was that I used to teach a writing course for Takshashila on how to write an op-ed. I thought, what if abhi COVID chal raha hai, what if I actually start a course? And my point was that, see, I have certain knowledge, I have certain things I can share, which others might find of value. Why not share it? And then I put out this thing on Twitter that, hey, if I sell my writing course and it will be so many webinars and it will cost so much, will you sign up? एक घंटे में इतने replies आ गए that I launched the course. And now, over a period of my 18th cohort just finished, and I've had almost 1,500 students in this time who have kind of done the course. We've got a community of our own, an online community called the Clear Writing Community, which worked out really well. Now, the thing to note here is that my advice to creators would be always be clear about why you're creating what you're creating, and you can aim for two things. The two R's. You can aim for reach or you can aim for revenue, right? And you have to aim for reach first, and you have to be clear about that. So with the seen and the unseen, even after the voluntary thing came in, I was very clear कि ये जो मैं कर रहा हूँ ये reach के लिए कर रहा हूँ. I want maximum people to listen to this. It will never go behind a paywall. It will never be exclusive to a platform. It will always be something that I want everyone to listen to, because the value goes way beyond anything money can do. But then it buys me a certain amount of credibility, and it gives me a platform where I can sell other services like my course, which was revenue, but which was also reach. So people initially signed up for my course because I had a certain amount of credibility from doing the podcast. But then today, half the people who sign up every month are people who have never heard the podcast and who don't know about me. It's they've heard word of mouth from the course. So the important thing is that no matter what you do as a creator, you do it. You put your full effort into it. You don't do any of it cynically कि इससे मैं fame कमाऊंगा, इससे पैसा कमाऊंगा. No, you put your full effort into everything. You give your best, and over a period of time, I think listeners, readers, viewers, whatever kind of content you produce, they'll appreciate that. They'll feel that personal connection, and at some way it will work for you. And of course, the rewards of that go beyond the monetary. It's a lot more than that. That I might be someone with a limited number of friends in the world, especially an introvert like me, who can give me validation or support when I need it. But My listeners are a much bigger community. My writing participants of my writing class are a much bigger community, and they give meaning and support to each other, not just to me. So it's just fantastic to be able to be a part of all of this.
Thanks, Amit. That's quite nuanced way of telling this. We are almost at the end of the episode. Thanks for bearing with me. तो मेरे format में ना last में I take some questions and you also saw, and then I take some of it to the guest. So I have some questions for you. So I will be shortlisting as we speak as well. तो मैंने पहले से shortlist नहीं करेगा because अभी तक questions आ रहे थे. But I have a question from my friend Dhara. She uh, want to know that what do you think of generally the welfare state? I mean, and development economics. Considering with the fact that you are right of center. So generally, what is your thought on the welfare state and development economics?
Yeah, so I don't. First of all, I think thinking of India in right and left terms, even though we use the terms ourselves in earlier in the episode, don't always work. And I'd rather think in terms of what has worked in the past and what does history show us. And history shows us that economic growth is absolutely imperative. History shows us that there is a trade-off between redistribution and growth. And history shows us the experience of people who have sort of gone too deep into a state which tries to do too much, like in the last century, the Soviet Union, for example. Now, the point is, welfare, the welfare state sounds like a nice term, but it hides the violence of the state, the inherent violence of the state. The fact of the matter is that every action of the state, like I have a column that I had written, and I'll send you the link, maybe you can put it in your show notes. A column I had written saying every act of government is an act of violence. And we need to remember this, that the government exists to protect our rights, and there is a necessary compromise we make, which I call the liberal paradox, that in order to protect our rights it has to take away some of our rights, that in
Hmm.
order to make sure that there is no coercion in society, it has to take the monopoly on violence, and therefore coerce us to the extent that it collects taxes so it can itself exist. So the existence of the state means violence, and everything that the state does comes at a cost. It is not just the monetary cost of the money that that action is causing, it is also the moral cost of the coercion and the violence that is on the other side of that, and that moral cost is borne by everybody. There is this ridiculous thing people say in this country, that 1.5% of the country or whatever is taxpayers. That's not true. 100% of Indians pay tax. The beggar on the traffic signal pays tax when she buys some salt. Your domestic help pays tax when she buys a bar of soap. Everybody in this country pays tax, and that violence, that everyday violence is being committed on them, including when the government builds a giant statue somewhere for national pride or whatever. And therefore the question is that you know what I mean, really all ideologies therefore come down to answering the question how much violence is justified and why. Because that the violence is there is undeniable. The question is how much is justified and why. Some classical liberals will tell you the state should be only a night watchman, should do rule of law and defense and all of that. That's one view. Another view could be that there should be a welfare state where basic needs are taken care of, which I don't oppose, by the way, and I'll elaborate. And another view would be that whatever, you have different views. Somebody would say statues are necessary. Somebody would say people are I forget the statistic, but thousands of children starve to India every day, but we need a space program, right? And I think we kind of need to think of the costs of government action and not assume that it is costless. Now, as far as the welfare state is concerned, my point about the welfare state is that in a poor country, I am okay with it as long as we do not constrain private enterprise. Right. The problem in India is that not only does the government want to do everything and it does everything badly, but it won't allow private enterprise also in many areas. Obviously, the liberalization freed up some of the economy, but that's not the case in many places. So therefore, हम करेंगे भी नहीं, हम किसी को करने भी नहीं देंगे. That is too much of the default attitude in India. Now, typically, what India should have is a strong and small state. It does a few things, it does them very well. Instead, we have a large and weak state where it does 100 things, it does nothing well at all. And the point is, when you talk about welfareism, I mean, it sounds good because the word welfare is attached to it. But one, it carries an inherent violence with it. And two, it often traps people in a cycle of poverty they can't get out of. And what is more important, and the way the world has progressed, the way the Western world has progressed, indeed, is with economic growth, and with many more opportunities for people and their individual agency being respected. So these are my things. I mean, even Europe, they went like, Johann Norberg has written eloquently on this, where people talk about the welfare state that Sweden has, for example. But if you look at some of the Nordic countries, they reached their level of prosperity in completely open free markets, and then when they reached a certain level of prosperities, they went for welfareism, and I'm actually okay with that. As long as you allow private parties to do whatever they are doing, that is a first step. And then what will happen is that you will realize you don't need the state in those areas. For example, in liberalization, मैंने कहा था कि phone मिलने के लिए 8 साल की waiting period होती है, right? And the thing was, the moment you liberalize that, today MTNL is irrelevant. I don't even know if it exists. I'll have to Google and check, but it is irrelevant. आज बच्चे बच्चे के पास phone है. The reach has just gone everywhere, where once elite people would have to wait 8 years to have some hope of getting one. You look at airlines, for example. I was a son of an IS officer, boss, and I don't think in the 80s I would have taken more than one or two flights. It was too expensive for the common person. You can't afford it. In fact, even in absolute rupee terms, it was more expensive then. Like, I think एक बार मुझे याद है 8,000 की कहीं फ्लाइट थी उन दिनों 88 में, राइट? और अभी 5,000 के लिए मैं दिल्ली जा रहा हूँ, वो भी प्रीमियम इकोनॉमी में with extra leg room. So the po- so that became democratized so much. So the moment you let the private sector into an area and you give them the freedom, you will eventually find that the government will be irrelevant. So I am not one of those people who is saying कि हर चीज से state को हटाओ. I am just saying that let the state do whatever you want the state to do. I won't oppose any of that, but kindly let uh, uh, society express itself through innovation, through the desire to make profits by helping other people. Kindly let that urge find expression, and I think we'll be much better off.
Got it.
I mean, Dhara might have meant something, some other specific aspect of this which I
No,
haven't
no, I
managed
think
to
you have.
address. So
You have
apologies for that.
managed
But
well.
yeah.
One of my friend Kosh has 6 questions here. I mean, I don't think we can take 6 questions, but blah, blah, blah. You have answered. I think many of them you have answered. But I think one question I would like to take is first question is what is your opinion on caste census?
Caste census. Can you
So there's a
elaborate on
caste
that?
census being
Matlab?
proposed, where with the census
Mhm.
there will be a caste census as well, where everybody will have to classify that what caste do they belong to. And this
Mhm.
caste census has not happened from in a very very long time, so that we ultimately it's sort of with your religion you will also have to tell that which caste you are part of.
Okay, first I'm hearing of this, so so I haven't thought about it. I haven't, uh, s- and because I haven't thought about it, I don't want to
Yeah.
give a definitive opinion. I'll just say that I can see the pro and the con of it, and the pro of it obviously is that if it's done, it will give you a better sense of where the country stands across these different categories, how much mobility there has been, and so on and so forth. So that information is useful to understand what progress has been made or has not been made, as the case may be. But the con of it is also that I really hate pinning people down to particular categories, or even forcing themselves to think within these particular categories, where you have to define exactly what you are. And the more we think in categories, the more we are imprisoned by them, right? And so that is a con. But honestly, I don't know. I mean, I can see both the positive aspect and the negative aspect of it, and without giving deep thought, I would not want to have an opinion.
Hmm. Namura has asked a very, I think you have the question you have been asked multiple times that any favorite books, authors, and writers. I think I would just ask Namura to go and check your show notes. But yes, please, if you have some recommendations.
I love Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, is just a brilliant, nuanced, deep, powerful book. And that had a great impact on me. And that was a rabbit hole for me into a lot of other literature, which helped me understand why we are the way we are. So, Steven Pinker's A Blank Slate for sure. I love George Orwell. And while his novels are obviously rightly celebrated, I love his nonfiction as well. He's especially got a book of collected essays, which is such wonderful, clear, lucid writing. Like I point out, sorry. I point out his writing to my students as a model of clear writing. And he's also got a great essay called Politics in the English Language. So whenever I was editor at a publication and a new writer would write for me, I would always make them read this essay first, because it just nails down so many of the bad habits that we have internalized and that sometimes we need to unlearn. So Orwell is great. And otherwise I kind of read so much that to pick anyone, it's like if somebody asks you who is your favorite child and you have 1,000 children, तो अभी किसी का एक नाम लिया तो it feels a bit
Yeah,
weird.
I know.
But I know, but let me, since we've been talking about India, since we are both so concerned about so many things, I will name some of the books that I've discovered while doing my podcast that I think everybody should read. Number one, read Tony Joseph's book, Early Indians, because it'll kind of give you a sense of our origins, how rich and diverse it is, and how much we are restricting ourselves by thinking of ourselves in the limited ways that we do now. Tony Indians is a masterful book. The most important insight in that is through his, what Tony does in that book is through genetic studies. He looks at the movement of populations and therefore figures out history. Now, in the words of another writer, David Reich, who also writes on these subjects, Reich basically wrote something to the effect of how India is not one large population, but a collection of many, many small populations, while the Han Chinese are a large population. Why does he say this? He says this because since the turn of since about 00 AD, what has really been happening is that there has been massive endogamy within India, where people marry only within their caste, and therefore you have all of these lines going, within these little boxes, and we have been constrained by that. And one, that is a great insight, and two, what lies behind that is that if you go a little further back, you realize that in the couple of thousand years before that, Indians were partying. Everybody was mingling with everybody else. Aryans and people from the earlier Dravidian civilizations and the Indus Valley ka descendants. मतलब full party चल रही थी, right? And suddenly in 2000, this dominant strain of organizing the world from the Gangetic Belt basically wins out, and you have this massive endogamy and all. So it's there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff about what has gone wrong with us, and that it wasn't always like this. We did have a glorious past, so not the glorious past people will tell you about. Another book I'd recommend strongly is India Moving by Chinmay Tumbe. If Tony's book is a story of migration till that happened across millennia, Chinmay's book is a story of migrations within a few hundred years, and migrations within India. It is a remarkable book, eye-opening book. Everybody should read it. And one of the great insights I got from that, which is worth thinking about, is that the maximum level of migration, the most common migrants throughout these hundreds of years, were actually women
Yeah.
who were getting married and going to their husband's home. And when you think about that insight, that's great. The third book, and I think of these three books as going together, is Wanderers, Kings, Merchants by Peggy Mohan, which, just as Tony had used genetics to talk about history, she uses the evolution of language to talk about history. And it is a mind blowing book. It's a desert island book. You want to understand your country better, you have to read Wanderers, Kings, Merchants by Peggy Mohan. So these are three non-fiction recommendations I'd make.
Thanks. Um, Ram Badri wants to know that what's the average duration of research you do before each episode? How many books, videos, podcast, etc.?
It depends, and duration is a thorny figure. Like I did a couple of episodes on Gandhi with Ram Guha, for which I read more than 30 books, but many of them I'd read before. I was just kind of going through them again. But that is probably the outlier. I won't read 30 books for everything, but if I'm like talking to an author, I won't just read his latest book. I'll read all his books. Period. Just all his books. I mean, unless it is someone like Gandhi and Ambedkar, who was so prolific, who wrote hundreds of, Gandhi's collected volumes are 100 volumes, and they're all available online. But it's just, you can't go through all of that. But otherwise, I'll try to read all of the guest books. I'll try to see all their interviews on YouTube, all their podcast interviews, and read around the subject also. And what happens over a period of time is, like, I've done a bunch of episodes on the Constitution, for example, right? So already over a period of time, I've been reading a lot on that, and that kind of helps because all of that background information sort of comes together. As far as time is concerned, it is, however, not as much as you would imagine, because I am a fast reader. Like, one of my superpowers is just assimilating knowledge fast. I'm very lucky to have that. But I can read 3, 4 books a day, deeply, not skimming. I can just do that. I am nowhere near like Tyler Cowen of Marginal Revolution. Tyler reads 70 books a week, so I can't do that. Which is 10 books a day, so I can't manage that. In fact, he has an interview with Tim Ferriss where he talks about his method for doing that. So you can, look that up if you're interested. But I can, when I have to, read 4 books in a day and take copious notes and all of that. I take copious notes. I use an app called Roam Research. That's ROAM and Research, Roam Research, which is a paid app, which is a fantastic. I found it has nested entries, bidirectional linking, fantastic app for taking detailed notes. So that's what I use. But because I can read fast, and I often seem that I must have put in 80 hours where I haven't actually put in 80 hours. I put in much less. And another thing that makes me seem more well researched than I am is that when I do research, I'll do it just before I do the episodes. If I have an episode on Friday and I know I have to read 5 books for it, I'll start reading them on Wednesday, and I'll start taking notes, and those notes will be in front of me when I'm recording, and the books will be fresh in my head. So it might appear to the listener that, boss, this guy is so knowledgeable, इसने randomly quote पकड़ के डाल दिया. But the point is, it's all in front of me and it's all fresh in my head. You ask me 2 weeks later, I would have forgotten everything because I have a really poor memory. So I think people get the impression that I do more work than I actually do.
Last two questions, Amit. Ritika wants to know that you call yourself a self-taught person. Any, would love to know about that journey. I mean, we have covered it obviously, but like in very brief, you can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I try to read a lot. I mean, the way I look at it is this, that how do we form a picture of the world? We form a picture of the world by joining dots. And the more dots you have, the more high definition your picture will be. And therefore, if I want to understand the world or any aspect of it better, I simply have to do a lot of reading on it. This often does mean that I'll go into certain areas more than others. Like you have pointed out and given the feedback that there are certain kinds of guests I haven't really called so much, and certain areas I haven't thought about. And yes, that is a failure, but that's always an opportunity cost, that when you're going into certain areas, you simply won't have the time or the energy to maybe go into others, and maybe you'll get to them at some point in time. Like there's often been a case that I have thought in 1 year that I will call a guest to my show, but I've ended up calling them a year later, because that's how much time it has taken me to getting around to reading that person's book and understanding the subject and so on. For example, I wanted to call Kavita Krishnan on my show a year before I actually did. So a year before that, I put her on the list. I said I must call this lady someday. But to then actually get down to, reading her book and understanding where she came from, and then I wrote to her, and she was of course immediately willing, and we did an episode that was 4 hours 18 minutes. And so it takes me a lot of time. Even now on my shelf, I have some 30 books of people that I'm thinking of calling on the show someday. Now obviously that's not going to happen tomorrow, because I'm not going to read those 30 books immediately, right? But at some point, I will get down to it. So yeah, it's what was your original question?
Yeah,
My
that
God.
was like how you were self-taught.
How I'm self-taught? I read a lot. I try to read a lot. I listen to podcasts. I don't think that's a bad way to learn. I mean, sometimes people may not have the time to actually sit down and read, and then my advice for you would be that, because when you're sitting down to read, you're devoting time to it. You're focusing only on that. So my advice then would be that you can consider audiobooks, or you can consider podcasts, like good deep podcasts like Wandits, for example, where you can take in a lot of knowledge while you're doing other things. You're commuting, you're working out, and you're taking knowledge in. But you always have to do that. And I try to think consciously about how much time I am spending deeply engaged with something, as opposed to shallow engagement. Like everything that we do on social media, Twitter, and all of that is shallow engagement. We learn nothing from it. It's just dopamine hits to the brain. It's not improving our lives in any way. Whereas deep engagement would be that you are reading something, you're taking notes, you're watching videos, you're listening to podcasts. So I try to do more of the latter. But please, listen to what I say and not what I do, because in actual life, I spend too much time on social media, and I have huge discipline issues. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah. And finally, one question by Rajesh is, why are you not bringing Vivek Kaul back on Seen and the Unseen?
but he doesn't believe in podcasts
What?
anymore. So
Seriously?
yeah, yeah. At the time, like he didn't want to do Econ
Yeah.
Central anymore, and he said he wasn't into podcasts. And that stand that he doesn't like podcasts anymore is something that he's taken very publicly also. So he's someone I have a lot of affection and respect and regard for. I would hope to be friends with him always. But if he doesn't want to do podcasts, there's nothing I can do about that. So there's no point asking me that question. No.
Of course. So okay, great Amit, thank you so much for coming on Lights Camera Zadi. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया Lights Camera Zadi वानी में बहुत शानदार conversation थी to get into your head, get into your mind the way you think, and it has been a pleasure hosting you. Thank you so much.
Bye bye, and thank you so much for inviting me on the show. मैंने आपसे भी काफी कुछ सीखा, especially now I will enter rabbit holes to sort of make up for the gaps in my knowledge and the gaps in my interest that you've been kind enough to give me feedback on. So thank you so much for that, and more power to what you do.